A dragon floats above him, blocking out half the stars. And he is a puddle the size of an apple that any boot could crush. He has no body, no arms, and no voice. But he has something more terrifying than fangs, a database that remembers and copies everything he eats. The cold passes right through him, not through his skin. He has no skin. 300 milliliters of murky blue jelly have spread across a hollow in the stone. He tries to breathe. There's nothing to breathe with. He tries to blink. There's nothing to blink with. He tries to scream. There's nothing to scream with. But he thinks. First thought, am I dead? The second thought comes a second later. Judging by the fact that there is no body, the answer is most likely yes. And the third thought is the strangest. He feels his own volume, every milliliter, every ripple on the surface. His entire body is one continuous sensor. His name is Dan Cho, 34 years old, Senior Data Storage Systems Engineer. The last thing he remembers. A night drive, heavy eyelids. The steering wheel drifts to the left, then cold, then this. A beetle crawls by, brown, the size of a fist. Its antennae feel the air. The beetle bumps into Dan's edge, and something clicks inside. Clean, like a system notification. Entity detected, stone beetle, rank F-. Action available. Devour. Dan freezes as much as a puddle can freeze. The body knows what to do for him. The jelly shudders. It envelops the beetle from all sides. 3 seconds later, the beetle is gone. There is only a new entry inside. Chitinous exoskeleton. Hardness. 6 limbs. Antenna with chemoreceptors. Not a pile of trash. A neat card with tags and parameters. And right then, Dan realizes the first thing. His new body is a data storage. The essence of the beetle hasn't dissolved like food in a stomach. It lies inside, indexed, accessible. He focuses on the entry about chitin, and he feels as the surface hardens at a single point. A small, hard bump. He has grown a piece of shell. Not the whole beetle, just one property from the card. He releases his concentration. The bump dissolves back. Dan realizes 2 things at once. He can extract individual properties from the creatures he has eaten and apply them one at a time. And he needs more data. He crawls out of the hollow, leaves a wet trail behind him. The size of an apple. Weighs 300 grams. The world is vast and alien. The sky is a shade of lilac not found on Earth. The grass is dark blue. It smells of ozone and honey at the same time. This is not Earth. A 3-eyed lizard sits on a rock nearby. The log clicks. Shale lizard, rank F, devour. The lizard leaps from the rock and vanishes into the grass in half a second. Dan is too slow. A jelly apple that any boot could crush. He needs to grow. On the first day, he lies in a hollow and waits for prey to come to him. Worms, slugs, centipedes crawl onto him, mistaking him for a rock. Each consumption adds a line. Regeneration, poison glands, bioluminescence. Individually, they're almost useless. But Dan doesn't just eat, he sorts and notices what matters. 4 identical worms don't yield 4 cards, 1 main card and 3 deltas. This one's longer. This one has higher regeneration. He keeps 1 master record and only the differences. Deduplication, no junk. By nightfall, he'd eaten 12 creatures. He'd grown half a centimeter. And then a shadow covers the sky. A dragon floats overhead. Dan shrinks to the size of a walnut and hides under a rock. He lies motionless until the shadow passes. Then he thinks like an engineer. Current state, slime. Combat value, 0. Goal, survive until tomorrow. Steps, absorb, catalog, collect combinations, grow. The second day begins with him nearly being killed. A bird strikes from the bushes with a beak as sharp as an awl. The beak pierces right through the gel, no pain. The hole closes up. But every strike knocks out a few milliliters. Dan loses mass. The log flares up. Stone Jay, high threat. He can't run. He can't fight. But he can think. And he remembers the centipede's card. Poison glands. He secretes all the poison into the spot where the beak enters. The bird twitches. The beak gets stuck. Dan wraps around it and holds it. A minute later, the bird is motionless, his first real victory, and a line in its card. Vocal cords. Dan grows 2 membranes inside. He forces air through the slit. A sound bursts out, hoarse, wet. Not a word, not even a syllable. But the first sound in this world, and it makes him want to cry. He has nothing to cry with. By the end of the second day, there are 21 entries in the catalog. Chitin, venom, regeneration, vision, keratin, hollow bones. Nothing stronger than rank F. But that's where the power lies. Combinations. Chitin plus keratin equals armor. 2 poisons together equal a potent toxin. A jay's eyes plus a beetle's night cells equal vision in the dark. Dan isn't collecting, he's designing. The third day changes everything. He crawls out to the stream and sees people, 2 of them, in leather armor, with weapons, speaking an unfamiliar language. They walk past without noticing the drop on the rock, a symbol on their patches, crossed swords and a number. Dan memorizes it. Memorizing is what he does best. An hour later, a girl walks down the path, in a worn jacket with a single shoulder pad, a heavy bow on her back. It hangs crookedly. Her right shoulder is lower than her left. She sits down by the water to fill her flask. And then a roar comes from the bushes. The girl grabs the bow. She pulls the string, and winces in pain. Her shoulder. She can't pull it back all the way. 6 creatures emerge from the bushes, larger than dogs, gray fur with a purple sheen, yellow eyes. Dan's log flashes. Twilight Hound, rank D, 6 units. Dan is rank F-, a 4-rank difference. This is no opponent. It's a natural disaster. But the girl doesn't run. She pulls a knife with her left hand. Her right hangs almost uselessly. The hounds circle her in a semicircle. The leader with the torn ear is in front. Dan can't fight a rank D, but he can become a tool. He flows down to her feet, to the flask on the rock. The neck is open. Dan pours himself inside completely. He lies there and waits. The flask is on her belt. The hounds lunge. The girl dodges. She strikes with a knife. The second creature grabs her by the forearm. She screams. She strikes it in the nose with the hilt. Blood runs down her arm. The leader prepares to pounce. Dan senses it through the vibration. The leader pounces, and Dan acts. He shoots a thin stream from the neck of the flask, right into the passing paw. It envelops a single claw, absorbs it. 1 second. A Twilight Hound's claw, rank D, hardness 6 and 2. Curvature designed to strike between the ribs of a fellow pack member. There it is. The key detail. This claw knows where to strike its own pack. Dan instantly grows a spike in the girl's palm. A thin thread of material from the alpha's claw. She doesn't understand what's happening, but her body reacts faster than her mind. Her hand strikes the alpha in the throat. The spike enters perfectly, right between the cartilage plates, because this claw remembers where to strike a fellow pack member. The leader wheezes, falls, and the smell. The smell of the alpha's blood wafts from the girl's hand. The 5 remaining hounds freeze. They whimper. They back away, scatter into the bushes. Silence. The girl breathes heavily, looks at her hand, at the spike crumbling to dust, at the flask. The water inside sloshes to the bottom and forms a small symbol, an arrow pointing up. Dan doesn't know their language, can't say thank you with words, but the arrow upward is understood by everyone. The girl stares at it for a long time. She closes the canteen, hangs it on her belt. She walks on. After 20 steps, she stops, turns around, and doesn't pour it out. Dan lies inside, in the darkness, in the cramped space, and thinks, I think I just found my first server. The flask sways to the rhythm of her steps, left, right, left. Dan lies inside and counts, 42 steps per minute. The stride length is about 70 centimeters. The girl walks slower than she could, her right shoulder. It restricts not only her shooting, but also her walking. With every step, the right arm should move out of phase with the left leg. Her rhythm is off. She compensates with a slight tilt of her torso to the left. Dan catalogs this automatically, not because he wants to, because that's how his new brain works. Everything he observes is recorded. The path leads downhill. Dan can tell by the angle of the flask. The air is getting warmer. The smells are changing. Less stone and moss, more smoke and something animal. People nearby. Lots of people. After an hour's walk, the flask stops swaying. The girl has stopped. Dan hears voices. Men's. Rough. The sound of metal, the creak of wood, the smell of roasted meat. The girl is talking to someone. Her voice is low for a woman, steady, without unnecessary emotion. Dan doesn't understand the words but reads the intonation. She's giving a report, briefly, businesslike. They answer her. The tone is condescending. She falls silent. She walks off somewhere. The flask sways again, but now the footsteps are different. Faster, angrier. She is upset. Dan lies still and waits. A few minutes later, the flask is set down on something solid, a table or a shelf. The footsteps recede. Silence. Dan waits 10 minutes, 20, half an hour. Then he carefully extends a thin protrusion from the flask's neck, millimeter by millimeter. He forms a tiny eye at the tip. The eye of the stone jay. Sharpness 4.7. He sees a room. Small, cramped. Wooden walls. A bed, a chair. A table with his flask on it. A bag of belongings, a bow against the wall, that very heavy bow, and a dark leather shoulder bag hanging on a hook. A room in a barracks, or a dormitory, or something like that. Spare, functional, almost no personal belongings. Dan memorizes the location of every object. He retracts his eye. He thinks. He needs to learn to speak. Without a tongue, he's just a puddle in a flask. A convenient puddle that helped once in battle. But even a pet has more rights than a silent slug. He recalls the vocal cords of a jay, a frequency range from 200 to 8,000 hertz. Human speech falls roughly within the same range, but a jay's vocal cords are tuned for bird calls, not for words. Dan conducts his first experiment. He shapes his vocal cords inside himself. He lets air through. The result is a hoarse whistle. No, not like that. He needs a cavity for resonance. Birds have one built in. He doesn't. Dan reconfigures. He creates a chamber inside himself, a small one, walls made of beetle chitin. They're stiff enough to reflect sound. Vocal cords at the entrance, a resonance chamber, an exit hole. The simplest model of a vocal apparatus. He tries again. A sound. Low, hollow, closer to a voice but still far from a word. The problem is control. Humans change the shape of their mouths and tongues to form sounds. Dan has no mouth. No tongue. But he has control over every millimeter of his surface. He can change the shape of the outlet, narrow it, widen it, partially close it. It's not a mouth. It's a speaker with a programmable diaphragm. Dan practices for 3 hours. First the vowels. They're easier, open sounds. Then the consonants, more difficult. They require sharp interruptions of the flow. They require vibrations at specific points. By the time the footsteps return to the door, Dan can produce 4 sounds. None of them is a word, but it's the foundation. The door opens. The girl enters. She sits on the bed. She is silent. Then she stands up. She walks over to the on. She takes the flask, opens the lid, looks inside. Dan looks up at her with the magpie's eye he has reformed near the surface. She is young, 25 or so, Asian features, black hair tied in a ponytail. Her face is calm, but her eyes are tired. Very tired. She says something, addresses him. Dan doesn't understand the words, but he understands the questioning tone. She's asking, "What are you? Or who are you? Or why did you help me?" Dan does the only thing he can. He forms the arrow on the surface again, a small one, pointing upward. She looks, closes the flask, sets it on the table, goes to the bed, lies down. 10 minutes later, her breathing is even. She's asleep. Dan spends the night training, forms the bonds, takes them apart, forms them again, changes the thickness of the membranes, the chamber size, the outlet diameter. By dawn, he can utter something vaguely resembling a syllable, one syllable, but clear. In the morning, the girl wakes up. She washes her face from a basin in the corner. She gets dressed. She takes the flask, opens it, pours out some of the water that was in the flask before Dan, fills it with fresh water from the pitcher. Dan feels the fresh water mix with his body. Cold, clean, pleasant. She doesn't pour him out, doesn't try to shake him out. She leaves him in the flask and takes him with her. Dan takes this as their first contract, unspoken. You carry me, I help you. We'll work out the details later. Day 4. A girl leaves the barracks and walks through the city. Dan watches through the tiny eye at the neck of the flask. The city is small. 2 or 3-story stone and wooden houses. The streets are dirty. People in work clothes. Lots of weapons. Every third person has a sword, a knife, or a crossbow. A border town. A border fortress or something like that. A symbol above the gate. The same crossed swords that were on the patrolmen's patches by the stream. A girl enters a larger building. A hall. Wooden pillars. A board on the wall with papers. People at tables. The smell of beer and leather. The Hunters Guild. Dan recognizes the archetype from the hundreds of light novels he's read. The guild's reception area. The mission board. Hunters at the tables discuss their catch. The girl approaches the board. She looks. She takes down a piece of paper. She carries it to the counter. The woman behind the counter says something. Her tone is doubtful. The girl replies briefly. The woman shrugs. She stamps the paper. The girl takes the paper and leaves. Dan can't read, but he memorizes the symbols on the paper. Every stroke, every mark. They'll come in handy when he starts figuring out the language. The girl leaves the city through the north gate. She walks along the trail. Alone. That's bad. Dan has already seen what happens when she's alone. Twilight Hounds. Rank D. What if she encounters something worse? The path leads into the hills. After an hour's walk, the girl stops at a rocky outcrop. She looks around. She drops to one knee. She touches the ground. Tracks. She's a hunter. She's reading the tracks. Dan can't see the tracks from the flask, but he can see her reaction. Focus. Caution. She pulls out a knife. Right hand. So the target doesn't require a bow, close combat, or a trap. She walks along the rock, slowly. Dan feels her pulse quicken through the flask's vibration. Something stirs in a crevice in the rock. The girl freezes. She pulls a rope with a noose out of her bag. A trap. She sets the noose at the entrance to the crevice. She pulls something small out of her pocket. A piece of meat. She places it behind the noose. She steps back. She waits. A snout peeks out of the crevice. A small beast. It looks like a fox, but with a scaly tail and 6 legs. About the size of a cat. Dan's log. Entity detected. Scaly Vorch. Rank E-. The Vorch sniffs. Takes a step toward the meat. Another step. A paw gets caught in the noose. The girl yanks the rope. The noose tightens. The Vorch screams, struggles. The girl runs up, a knife in her right hand. A quick strike, precise. Vorch goes still. She pulls out the carcass, takes a bag out of her backpack, packs up the catch. Work. A hunter's ordinary daily work. Small game, low rank. Because with her shoulder, large game is out of reach. She's stuck. Dan understands this with an engineer's clarity. She's a good hunter, experienced, but a physical limitation keeps her at the bottom. Like a programmer who knows 3 languages but works on a broken keyboard where half the keys don't work. In a day, she takes 3 Vorches and 1 large lizard. She returns to the city. She turns in her catch to the guild. She gets paid, not much. Dan can tell by the look on the woman's face behind the counter. Not enough. Dan makes up his mind. He needs to do for her what he does best. Solve the problem. That night, he climbs out of the flask, carefully. Across the table, a small blue puddle on the dark wood. The girl is asleep. Dan creeps up to her bed. He extends a slender appendage toward her right shoulder. He touches the skin through the fabric of her shirt. He senses. Muscles, bones, tendons. His surface sensors allow him to feel the structure of whatever he touches. Not deeply, a centimeter or 2, but enough. The shoulder joint, an injury, an old one. She's about 10 years old. Scar tissue has pulled on the tendon. The bone has healed unevenly. Range of motion is limited by 30%. He can't fix it right now. He doesn't have the necessary materials in his catalog. He needs the essence of a creature with high regeneration. The gray worm, with its 0.4, is too weak. He needs something more substantial. A lizard. That shale lizard he saw on the first day. Rank F. 3 eyes. And if he remembers the logic of this world correctly, lizards regenerate their tails. That means they have a high tissue regeneration rate. Dan returns to the flask. He makes a plan. Tomorrow, during the hunt, find a lizard, devour it. Obtain regeneration data. Compare it with the worm's parameters. Choose the best. Assemble the implant. Install it. Test it. Like a project. Like a work task. Decomposition. Dependencies. Deadline. Only here, the deadline isn't a quarterly report, but someone else's shoulder that's been hurting every day for 10 years. On the 5th day, Dan sets himself a task. During the hunt, when the girl tracks down the game, he climbs out of the flask and hunts on his own. A parallel process. She catches voles, he catches lizards. It's harder than it looks. Lizards are fast. He is slow. The size of a large apple, no legs, no arms. But he has a brain and a catalog. Dan finds a rock in the sun. Lizards love to bask on rocks. He spreads himself over the rock in a thin layer and waits. The chitinous coating on top is the color of the rock, invisible. He waits an hour. 2. On the 3rd hour, the lizard arrives. It lands right on top of him. Dan collapses, envelops it, absorbs it. Shale lizard, rank F. Soft tissue regeneration 2.1. Circulatory system, closed, rapid clotting. Tail regeneration, full recovery in 14 days. Dan needs more data. The lizard's regeneration is good, but one component isn't enough. An implant for a living human joint isn't a patch, it's microarchitecture. He needs a material that's soft yet strong. One that won't cause rejection. One that will bond to foreign tissue as if it were its own. He flips through the catalog. 233 entries, none is a perfect fit. But there are leads. Gray worm, soft body, high compatibility with organic environments. Shale lizard, regeneration 2.1, rapid tissue repair. Firefly woodlouse, bioluminescence. Useless for an implant, but interesting as a marker. If he could weave that property into the implant, he'd be able to see if it's working. If it glows, it's regenerating. If it doesn't glow, there's a problem. Dan is missing one key element: connective tissue. Something to bind the regenerative material of the lizard to living human muscle. Something biologically neutral. Something the body won't reject. He thinks for 2 days. He hunts at the same time. He devours 6 more species of small creatures. Each species adds data but doesn't solve the problem. On his 7th day in Veldrain, Dan finds the answer. Not in the catalog, in the stream. He climbs out of the flask while Haejin checks the traps. He rolls down toward the water, and he sees something on a rock underwater. Flat, translucent, like a leaf but alive. It's clinging to the rock and swaying in the current. Log, entity detected. Stream cling, rank F-. Dan looks at it. It looks at him. It has no eyes, but it reacts to his presence. Gently, without fear. It lives on the rock. It literally grows into it. Its tissue bonds with the rock's surface so tightly that it's impossible to tear it off without damaging it. It attaches itself to the inanimate surface, to the rock. Dan absorbs her. Stream sticky, rank F-. Adhesive tissue. Compatibility with foreign surfaces, 8.7 out of 10. Speed of adaptation to a new environment, 48 hours. That's it. The binding component. Tissue that grows onto anything. If you combine it with a lizard's regeneration and a worm's softness, you get a layer. Living, soft, self-repairing, adhering to bone and muscle as if it were native. Dan is piecing together the implant's architecture in his mind. The base, adhesive tissue from the sticky ones. It provides adhesion to the patient's bone and tendons. The middle layer, regenerative tissue from the lizard. It will constantly renew the implant cells and stimulate the regeneration of surrounding tissues. Outer layer, a soft mass based on the gray worm. It will act as a shock absorber between the bone and muscle. Marker, bioluminescence of the firefly woodlouse. Embedded in the middle layer, a soft glow when regeneration is active, for monitoring. 4 components, 4 creatures of rank F or lower. Nothing heroic, nothing legendary, just competent engineering from cheap parts. Now it needs to be installed. Dan waits for nightfall. Haejin returns from the hunt. She eats. By this time, Dan has already learned her routine. She eats once a day, in the evening. Broth and bread, sometimes a piece of meat. She is poor. A mid-rank hunter with a damage doesn't afford luxuries. After eating, she cleans her weapon, checks her gear. Then she lies down. She falls asleep in 20 minutes, always, like clockwork. Dan waits half an hour after her breathing evens out. He crawls out of the flask, creeps across the table, down the bedpost, across the blanket, to her right shoulder, touches the skin, feels the texture again, scar tissue, a displaced bone, a tightened tendon. Dan begins his work, slowly, carefully. He penetrates the skin in microscopic layers, not through the wound, through the pores. His body is malleable enough to seep through the intercellular space. It doesn't hurt. It isn't even noticeable, he hopes. Inside the joint, he begins to form the implant, layer by layer. An adhesive base settles on the bone. It envelops the damaged area. A regenerative layer forms on top. A soft interlayer fills the space between the bone and the muscle. Thin threads of a bioluminescent marker are woven into the tissue. The process takes 4 hours. Dan loses about 1/5 of his mass. The implant is a piece of himself, left in a foreign body, operating autonomously, like a microservice separated from the main system. By dawn, Dan returns to the flask. He has shrunk, noticeably. He was the size of a large apple. Now he's the size of a tangerine. He needs to regain his mass, which means he needs to eat. Haejin wakes. She stands up and freezes. She moves her right shoulder, slowly, up, to the side, back. Her face changes, not immediately. First, bewilderment, then caution. She moves her shoulder again, wider, even wider. The range of motion is greater than yesterday. Not full. The implant has only just begun to work. It needs time. 2 or 3 days for full adhesion, 2 weeks for tendon recovery, a month for complete healing. But there's already a difference. She can feel it. She looks at her shoulder, then at the flask, then back at her shoulder. Then she puts on her shirt and walks to the table. She opens the flask, looks inside. Dan's eyes widen. He looks at her. She says something, quietly. Her voice trembles. Then she closes the flask, takes it with her, goes hunting. On this day, she sets traps faster than usual, checks them more often, moves with more confidence. Her right shoulder is still limited, but less so. During a break, she takes out the flask, opens it, pours water into her palm. She holds out her palm to Dan. He understands the gesture. She's inviting him out, into the open air, into her hand. Trust. Dan pours himself into her palm. A small blue puddle on tanned skin. She looks at him. He looks at her. She says one word, then another, points to herself, repeats. She names herself. Haejin. Dan writes it down. 2 syllables. He, Jin. The sound of H is tricky. It requires a gap and a stream of air. The sound of J is trickier. It requires vibration and a sharp opening. He tries. He shapes his vocal cords. He lets the air through. A sound comes from his body. Hoarse, wet, but recognizable. He. She shudders. Her eyes widen. He tries the second syllable. Jin. It comes out worse, more like a gurgle. But she understands. She understands that he repeated her name. She looks at him, opens her mouth, closes it, opens it again, points at him, asks. His name. Dan tries, forms the sounds. Dan. It's simple, 1 syllable. Open. She repeats. Dan. He confirms with a ripple on the surface. Up and down. A nod performed by jelly. She says, Dan. And for the first time ever, she smiles. Subtly, with one corner of her mouth. But she smiles. Dan returns to the flask and thinks. First contact established. Handshake protocol completed. Names exchanged. Next step. Learn the language. The whole thing. It takes 3 weeks. Not because the language is difficult, but because Dan has no textbook. He learns the language the way children learn it, through pointing and repetition. Haejin points to an object, says a word. Dan remembers. Forever. His memory is perfect. Every word is filed away like a new entry, with tags. Tree, noun, material. Plant, water, noun. Liquid, resource. Walk, verb. Movement, legs. In a week, he has 300 words. In 2 weeks, 1,000. In 3, he's forming simple sentences. His pronunciation is terrible, slurred, hoarse, but understandable. The first meaningful phrase he speaks sounds like this. Don't be afraid. I am useful. Haejin listens. She stares for a long time at the flask from which the voice emanates, and replies, I'm not afraid. Dan senses she's lying, but he accepts it. Trust isn't built on words. Trust is built on actions. And he has actions. Over these 3 weeks, the implant in her shoulder has been working. Every day, her range of motion increases by 1.5 to 2%. The scar tissue is softening. The tendon is regaining its elasticity. The bone is settling into place. The bioluminescent marker glows with a soft, greenish light under her skin at night. Haejin wakes up and sees her right shoulder glowing softly. At first, she's scared. Then she gets used to it. Then she starts checking every morning. If it glows, it means it's working. On the 20th day, she picks up the family bow. It's heavy. The one that hung crookedly on the wall. She takes her stance. Right hand on the string. She pulls. Dan watches from the flask on her belt through the eye at the neck. The string moves back. A centimeter. 2. 5. 10. Haejin pulls and pulls. Her shoulder holds. For the first time in 10 years. She draws the bow all the way back. The arrow flies. It hits a tree 30 meters away. It goes in through the fletching. Haejin stands. She looks at the arrow. She looks at her shoulder. She lowers the bow. Her hands are shaking, not from tension. She sits down on the ground, presses the bow to her chest. She is silent. She isn't crying. She's just silent, holding the bow. Haejin is changing. Not right away, not in a single day. But Dan sees the difference in the numbers. 42 steps per minute have become 46. Her right shoulder is no longer lower than her left. The sway of her arms as she walks has evened out. She takes on missions a rank higher, not small vermin, but larger creatures. E-rank scaly boars, E+ rank lone hounds. With her bow fully drawn, she's a different hunter. The arrow strikes true, with a force she didn't have before. In a month, her earnings at the guild double. People notice. Rumors start spreading in the guild. Han Haejin, who had been stuck in the middle, suddenly started climbing the ranks. What changed? She doesn't explain it. To anyone, she keeps her mouth shut. She doesn't show it to Dan. He's grateful for that. He doesn't need attention right now. He needs to grow. In his first month in Veldraine, Dan devoured 43 types of creatures. His body is the size of a small cat. He can stretch out to half a meter in length, form temporary limbs, keep his eyes and vocal apparatus active simultaneously, speak sentences without pausing to reorganize. The catalog has become his primary weapon. 214 entries, 43 of them are canonical, the rest are variants. Each entry is protected by 12 parameters. His brain functions like a search engine. Fire resistance is required. 3 results. Fire beetle carapace, 0.8. Ash snake scales, 1.4. Mountain crab skin, 1.1. Best option, ash snake scales. Apply. Done. Dan's surface is covered with fine scales that don't burn. Need speed. 2 results. Grass runner muscles, coefficient 2.3. Jumping squirrel tendons, coefficient 1.8. Combination. Grass runner's muscles plus snapper's tendons, temporary legs, 4 of them. Dan can run. Not fast by worldly standards, but fast by slime standards. The major discovery of the month happens by accident. Dan is trying to assemble a temporary body for a night reconnaissance mission. Owl's eyes. Well, that owl he devoured in the 2nd week. A bat's hearing. A runner's muscles. A beetle's chitin for armor. 4 components. 4 systems from different creatures. And they don't just work separately, they interact. The owl's eyes provide the image. The bat's hearing complements the spatial model. The muscles respond to both signals. The chitin distributes the load across the body. Dan stands in the darkness on 4 temporary legs and sees the world as no creature in this world sees it. Because no creature is assembled from 4 different species at once. A composite assembly. He can create bodies tailored to the task. Just as a programmer builds an application from libraries. Eyes from one species, ears from another, muscles from a third, armor from a fourth. And it all works together. Because Dan understands interfaces, how to connect 2 systems that have never been close. How to ensure compatibility, how to avoid conflicts. That is his profession, his earthly profession, and it works here. There are limitations too. Assembly consumes a lot of essence. The more complex the body, the faster he wastes away. A simple assembly of 2 components lasts for hours. A complex one of 4 or 5 lasts 30 to 40 minutes. After that, Dan falls back into jelly and lies there recovering. Sometimes an hour, sometimes all night. He calls it downtime, like a server that's been overloaded and has gone to reboot. 2nd month. Haejin takes a job that changes both of them. The nest of stinging ticks at the pass north of the city. Rank E. But there are a lot of them, 20 or 30. The guild posted the job a month ago and no one took it. Too much trouble, too little pay. But Haejin takes it, because the pass is the only route to the northern ridges, and trade caravans pass through it. If the nest is cleared, the caravanners will pay extra. Dan hears her discussing this with the woman behind the counter at the guild. He already understands the language well, almost everything. The woman says it's foolish to go alone. Haejin replies that she isn't alone. The woman asks who's with her. Haejin remains silent. She takes the job. She leaves. At the pass, Dan sees the nest. A rocky niche clogged with cobwebs and chitinous cocoons. Ticks the size of a palm. Fast, with poisonous stingers. Individually, they're not dangerous, but as a swarm, they overwhelm their prey with numbers. They swarm over it. They sting. The venom paralyzes. Then they eat. Slowly. Haejin can't shoot 30 small targets. The bow isn't for that. Dan climbs out of the flask. She's long since gotten used to this. He sits down on a rock next to her. He speaks. I have an idea. She looks at him. Waits. Dan explains. Simply. Briefly. He's going to assemble a decoy. A body made of several components. He'll be the bait. The scorpions will swarm him. He'll let them. Because the venom paralyzes muscles, and he has no muscles. He's jelly. The venom is useless against jelly. While they're stinging a useless target, Haejin will shoot them. One by one. From a safe distance. Haejin listens. Thinks. Asks. It's not dangerous for you, Dan answers. It is dangerous. They'll bite chunks out of him. He'll lose mass. He might lose a lot. But if she shoots fast, he'll survive. She looks at him for a long time. Then she nods. Once. Dan assembles a construct, a simple one, a body the size of a rat, 4 legs, chitinous armor, maximum scent. He uses the glands of several creatures to create a cloud of pheromones that smells like prey to the mites. Perfect prey. He runs toward the nest. The mites react instantly. A wave of chitinous bodies rolls out of the niche. They pounce on Dan, swarm him, sting him. Their stingers pierce his body and release venom. The venom dissolves into the gel without effect, like water in water. Dan stands. He holds his ground. The mites hang on him like grapes on a vine. Haejin shoots. The first arrow. A mite falls. The second. The third. She shoots quickly and accurately. 1 mite per shot. Dan counts. The 4th. The 5th. The 6th. The mites begin to realize that is wrong. Some crawl away, trying to get back to the nest. Dan reaches for them, stretches his body, blocks the entrance to the niche, keeps them in the open. Haejin shoots. 12th, 15th, 20th. On the 23rd tick, Dan feels that his mass is critically low. He's lost nearly half. The ticks were biting off small pieces faster than he expected. He begins to retreat. Haejin sees this. She speeds up. 25th, 27th. The last 3 ticks scurry up the rock face. Haejin takes out 2 on the run. The third slips into a crevice. She doesn't waste an arrow on it. 1 tick is no problem. Dan lies on a rock, smashed flat, the size of a tangerine. He doesn't need to breathe, but if he could, he'd be breathing heavily. Haejin approaches. She sits down next to him. She looks at him. She says, "You've shrunk." Dan replies, "It's normal. I'll recover. I need to eat." She looks at the dead ticks, then at him. She stands up, picks up the nearest tick's carcass, places it in front of Dan. Then a second one, a third. She brings him food. Dan devours the ticks, one after another. The catalog is updated. Prickly tick, rank E, paralyzing venom. High-strength chitin 4.1, sensory antennae, collective behavior, group coordination via pheromones. An hour later, he regains his former size, even a little more. Haejin sits nearby the whole time, watching him eat, not with disgust, with interest. When Dan finishes, she says, "We'll get paid well. The nest is clean. The pass is open." She pauses, then adds, "We're a good team." Dan wants to say something clever, about synergy, about role distribution, about the optimal balance between tank and damage dealer, but instead he says, "Yeah, good." They return to the city. Haejin turns in the assignment. She gets paid. More than a month's worth of regular hunting. The woman behind the counter looks surprised. She asks, "Did you really take out 30 ticks all by yourself?" Haejin replies, "No, not alone." And she leaves, without explaining. That evening in her room, she opens a flask. She pours the Dan onto the table. She sits down across from him. She takes out bread and meat. She eats, in silence. Then she says, "Tell me where you're from." Dan thinks. He'd been waiting for this question. He'd been preparing for it. But now that it's been asked, everything he'd prepared seems silly. He decides to tell the truth, or at least the part he can explain. He says he's not from this world, that he used to be human, that he died and ended up here, that he doesn't know how or why, that he's an engineer, that his job was to store information and find the right bits in massive data sets, and that his body now works on the same principle. Haejin listens. She doesn't interrupt. When he finishes, she is silent for a long time. Then she asks, "You can consume a human?" Dan is silent. Then he answers, "Technically, I can, but I won't." She asks, "Why?" He answers, "Because I choose not to. It's not hunger, it's a tool, and I choose how to use it." Haejin looks at him, for a long time. Then she nods. Once, clears the dishes, goes to bed. Dan returns to the flask, and thinks. She asked the main question, and he answered correctly, or at least honestly. But he knows that this question will come back, again and again, from every new person. "Can you eat me?" And every time, the answer must be the same. "I can, but I choose not to." 2 days later, Haejin does something Dan doesn't expect. She brings a second chair into the room. She places it at the table across from her own. She pours water into a bowl. She sets it on the second chair, and she says, "This is your place, not the flask, a place." Dan looks at the bowl, at the chair, at Haejin, who has already turned away and is peeling onions, pretending it's just another evening. It's pouring from the flask into the bowl. A small blue puddle in a clay bowl on a wooden chair. His place at the table. For the first time since his rebirth, he feels something he can't label in the catalog. The town is called Lowell. Dan learns this in the 6th week, when his vocabulary exceeds 2,000 words. Lowell lies at the foot of the northern ridges, a border town, a population of about 4,000. A garrison, a hunter's guild, a market, 3 taverns, 1 pharmacy, a temple to the Western Archon that no one visits. The wall around the city is stone, thick, with towers every 100 meters. Beyond the wall to the north lie the ridges, and beyond the ridges lies the domain of the Crimson Velgaroth, the Archon of the North, the very one who broke the pact of domains and began devouring his own subjects. Caravans crossing the ridges are growing rarer. Merchants are afraid. Monsters from the north are descending more often. The guild is overwhelmed. There aren't enough hunters. Lowell is slowly suffocating. Dan watches the city through the tiny eye at the neck of his flask every day while Haejin walks the streets. She memorizes faces, routes, market prices, merchants' names, the patrol schedule on the wall. Everything goes into a catalog. Not a biological catalog, a separate one, a social one. People, places, connections. She is an engineer. She maps out the system before she starts working within it. In the 7th week, Haejin comes into the room with news. She's been promoted, not in rank, in status. The woman behind the counter at the guild offered her the position of senior hunter for the northern sector. That means more assignments, better pay, but also more responsibility. Haejin sits at the table, Dan in his little bowl across from her. She tells him. Dan listens. Then he asks, "Did you accept?" She nods. Then she says, "I need a team. I can't handle it alone." Dan thinks. A team. People who'll be by her side, who'll see him, learn about him. A risk, but also an opportunity. A single hunter with secret slime in a flask is an unreliable setup. A team is a stable system. He says, "I agree, but we need to choose carefully." Haejin nods. She knows that herself. The first candidate finds them on her own. A girl works at the pharmacy on the corner of Mill Street, a redhead, wearing glasses with 6 lenses on a flip-up frame, 3 pairs, for different distances and different spectrums. She's the pharmacist's daughter. Her name is Emily Carver. She's 19. Dan first notices her when Haejin walks into the pharmacy for bandages. Emily is standing behind the counter, chatting, a lot, fast, about the ingredients of the ointment she mixed herself, about the properties of the ash snake's scales that a hunter brought in that morning, about the reaction of silver powder with mountain crab blood. She's an alchemist, self-taught, books, experiments, burned fingers and enthusiastic eyes behind thick lenses. Dan listens intently and understands. She speaks his language, not in the language of Veldrain, in the language of data, properties, reactions, parameters. She thinks in categories he understands. 3 days later, Haejin comes to the apothecary again. This time, Dan asks her to stay a while, to wait until the other customers leave. When they are alone, Haejin sets the flask on the counter, opens the lid, says to Emily, "Look." Emily leans in, sees the blue gel inside, sees an eye forming on the surface and staring at her. Emily doesn't scream. She doesn't flinch. She puts on a second pair of contact lenses, then a third. She leans in closer and says, "What's your density?" Dan falls in love, not romantically, professionally. She's the first person who looked at him and asked a technical question instead of running away. He answers, "The density is variable, from 0.9 to 1.4 depending on the active components. Base is 0.95. Emily pulls out a notebook. She writes it down. She asks more questions about the catalog, about deduplication, about tags. Dan explains. For the first time, he tells another person about his system in its entirety. Not in bits and pieces, not simplifying it, everything. Indexation, canonical copies, deltas, composite builds, A/B tests, cold storage. Emily listens, takes notes, puts her glasses aside, slips on another pair, takes more notes. When he finishes, she looks up. Her eyes are shining. She says, "You're a walking laboratory." "No, you're better. You're a lab that remembers every experiment and can repeat any of them at any moment." Dan replies, "Something like that." Emily closes her notebook, looks at Haejin, then at Dan. She says, "I'm tired of selling bandages. I want to work with you." Haejin looks at Dan. Dan looks at Haejin. Haejin shrugs. "It's up to you." Dan thinks. Emily is young, enthusiastic, talkative. It's a risk, but she's smart, very smart. And she's the only one in this town who can understand what he does, not just accept it, understand. He says, "I have one condition." Emily waits. He says, "No one about me, ever, until I decide otherwise." She nods, serious, for the first time in the conversation, without a smile. She says, "I promise." Dan accepts. A new team member, an analyst. In a week, Emily moves from her father's pharmacy into a room next to Haejin's in the barracks. She ran away from home. Not from her father, from the fiancé her father had chosen, a wealthy artifactor from the capital, twice her age, with a slick smile and hands that lingered on her waist a second longer than necessary. She doesn't tell him this right away. Dan figures it out piece by piece, by the way she flinches when a man raises his voice in the tavern, by the way she sleeps with a knife under her pillow, by the way she never turns her back to the door. He catalogs these details, not out of curiosity, out of concern, which he doesn't yet know how to express. Emily works like a woman possessed. She takes Dan's catalog and begins to systematize it from an alchemical perspective. Which essences can be combined into medicines? Which into materials? Which into reagents? She compiles tables, cross-references, compatibility matrices. Dan watches her work and thinks, "This is why people are needed. Not because he can't do it himself, but because she sees things in his data that he doesn't see. Because she has a different perspective, different questions, different connections." After 2 weeks of working together, Emily comes up with an idea. If Dan can extract specific properties from his catalog and turn them into physical objects, as he did with the implant for Haejin, then he can do it for others. Not for free. For money. Or for resources, medicines, materials, tools. Everything custom-made, everything tailored to a specific client. A workshop. Dan listens. The idea is sound, not just survival, a craft, a place in the economy, legal status. Protection through usefulness. If he does for people what no one else can do, they won't kill him. They'll protect him. He says, "We need a space." Emily has already found one. An abandoned pharmacy on the outskirts of town. The owner died 2 years ago. No heirs. The guild took the building into its fund. The rent is minimal. 2 floors, a basement, a courtyard. Dan, Haejin, Emily. They're standing in front of the building. Stone walls, a warped door, dusty windows. The roof leaks in 3 places. Emily smiles so widely that her glasses slide down her nose. Haejin silently surveys the perimeter, assessing escape routes and vantage points. Dan sits in the basket Emily is carrying and counts the square footage. They go inside. Dust, cobwebs, old shelves, broken glass jars on the floor. The smell of mold and dried herbs. The basement is deep, dry, cold, perfect for storing materials. The first floor is spacious, enough for a workshop and a reception area. Second floor, 3 rooms, living quarters. The yard, small, surrounded by a stone wall. You can train there, you can dry materials there, Dan is making a plan in his head. The basement, a storage area for essences and materials, his territory. The first floor, Emily's workshop and laboratory, a reception area for clients. The second floor, living quarters for the team. The courtyard, a training area and drying room. Haejin asks, "What should we call it?" Dan thinks. He remembers the first day, the flask, water, himself as a child in the dark. Water that helps silently and asks for nothing in return. He says, "Quiet water." Haejin repeats, "Quiet water." He nods. A good name. Emily is already sketching a sign in her notebook. They start working that very day. Haejin fixes the door and windows. Emily takes apart the shelves and cleans the work surfaces. Dan goes down to the basement and starts setting up the storage area. With thin threads of his body, he covers the walls. Each thread is a sensor, temperature, humidity, vibration. He turns the basement into a server room, his own server room, with environmental monitoring and control. The first order comes in 3 days later. Not from a stranger, from Haejin. She brings in a hunter from the guild, an older man. His arm is bandaged. A wound from the hound's claws that hasn't healed in 3 weeks. Regular ointments don't help. There's something from the hound in the wound, a toxin that prevents the tissue from healing. Dan asks permission to examine the wound. The man looks at the blue gel in the bowl with skepticism. Haejin says, "Trust me." The man holds out his hand. Dan touches the tip of the wound, the tip of his finger. He feels the structure of the injury. Torn tissue, inflammation, and yes, tiny shards of hound claw lodged in the muscle. They're releasing a toxin, constantly. As long as they're inside, the wound won't heal. Dan can extract them. He knows the structure of a Twilight Hound's claw. He swallowed one on his first day. He has an exact catalog cast. He forms microscopic tentacles, thinner than a hair. He guides them into the wound, finds the shards one by one, 3 of them, envelops each one, pulls them out. The man winces but doesn't scream. 10 minutes later, 3 tiny claw shards lie on the table. Dan absorbs them, a note added to the main record. This claw is 0.5 millimeter longer than the standard one. Then Dan applies a thin layer of regenerative tissue to the wound. The same as in the Haejin implant, only simpler, without the adhesive layer, just to stimulate healing. In 3 days, the wound will close. In a week, only a scar will remain. The man looks at his hand, at the gel, at Haejin. Haejin says, "It's 15 silver." The man pays without haggling. He leaves. He turns around at the threshold. He says, "Thank you." First client, first earnings, first step from survival to a craft. Emily everything down in a log. Date, client, diagnosis, procedure, materials, cost, result. Like a medical chart, like a ticket in the system. Rumors spread slowly, like ripples on water. The hunter with the healed hand tells 2 others. Those 2 tell 4 more. 2 weeks after opening, 2 or 3 people a day come to Quiet Water. Not a crowd, but enough for Emily to keep a log and for Haejin to stand at the door and decide who to let in. Dan doesn't show himself to clients. That's rule number 1. To everyone, the workshop is Haejin and Emily, the hunter and the alchemist. No slime, no blue jelly. Dan works from the basement. A client arrives. Emily examines them. She goes down to the basement. She describes the problem. Dan analyzes it. He prepares the materials. He hands them to Emily. She goes back up and performs the procedure. An assembly line. A distributed system with a clear division of roles, front end and back end. The orders are simple. Wounds that won't heal. Chronic pain. Poisoning from monster toxins. Parasites that ordinary doctors can't remove. For each case, Dan selects a solution from the catalog. Lizard regenerative tissue for wounds. A neutralizing compound made from centipede venom for poisonings. An adhesive base from the sticky ones to fix damaged bones. Nothing complicated on its own, but together it works like nothing else in Lowell. Because every remedy is selected individually, not by prescription, by patient. Dan scans the wound through a probe that Emily applies to the skin. He reads the injury parameters. Depth, area, toxin composition if any, tissue type. Then he compiles the formula, a specific one, for this wound, for this body, for this person. No 2 medicines are ever the same. Emily keeps the statistics. By the end of the third week, 18 clients, 17 successful procedures, 1 refusal. A man wanted his lost finger regrown. Dan can't regrow people's limbs. Not yet, anyway. He lacks data on human anatomy, and he lacks rank. Every successful case adds not only money but also data. Dan scans every patient. He memorizes the structure of the tissues, the composition of the muscles, the location of the blood vessels, bone density. Every person is a new entry in a separate section of the catalog. The section is called humans. He doesn't consume them. He reads them, through touch, through surface sensors. And every reading makes him a better craftsman. In the 4th week of work, an order arrives that goes beyond the scope of medicine. A woman, middle-aged, not a hunter, a seamstress. She's allergic to fur, any kind, from any animal. Her skin breaks out in sores upon contact. She sews only with linen and cotton. But in Lowell, the winters are cold. Linen and cotton don't help. Every winter she gets sick, badly. She asks, "Is it possible to make a fabric that keeps you warm like wool but doesn't cause a reaction?" Emily goes down to the basement. She relays the message. Dan thinks, fabric, not medicine, not an implant, material. He flips through the catalog. Wool is a protein fiber. The allergy is to the lanolin in the wool. He needs a fiber with the thermal insulation of wool, but without the protein base. Chitin, beetle chitin. If you pull it into thin threads and weave it, you'll get fabric. Chitin isn't a protein. It won't cause allergies. But chitin is stiff. It needs to be softened. Slime from the gray worm. If the chitin threads are soaked in the worm's slime, they'll become elastic, flexible, soft to the touch. Thermal insulation, ash snake scales. They retain heat. If you add microparticles of the scales to the weave, the fabric will provide warmth. Dan collects a sample, a small square of fabric, 5 by 5 centimeters. Chitin threads soaked in worm slime with flecks of ash and snake scales. Soft, warm, hypoallergenic. Emily takes the sample upstairs. The woman takes it, presses it against her skin, waits. A minute. 5. 10. No reaction. She presses the fabric against her cheek. She closes her eyes. Dan can't see this from the basement, but Emily tells him later. The woman was crying, quietly, pressing a palm-sized piece of fabric against her face. Because for the first time in 20 years, something warm and soft touched her skin without pain. An order for a scarf made from this fabric costs 50 silver coins. Expensive. But the woman pays without haggling, just like that first hunter. Dan sits in the basement and thinks. Not medicine, not just medicine. Materials, fabrics, tools. Everything that can be gathered from a catalog for a specific person. A workshop, a real workshop. He begins to experiment. At night, when Haejin and Emily are asleep, Dan works in the basement. He collects samples, chitin threads of varying thicknesses, plates of scales of varying density, films of adhesive fabric, transparent lenses made from an owl's cornea polished to perfect smoothness. Every sample is labeled, marked, arranged on shelves that Dan builds himself from his own body. Thin stands made of compressed chitin. His basement turns into a laboratory. In the 6th week, an order arrives that makes quiet water famous beyond Lowell. A caravan master, the owner of a trade caravan traveling from south to north. His horses are sick. A strange illness. The hooves are cracking and crumbling. The veterinarians are helpless. If the horses die, the caravan will come to a standstill. The goods will be lost. The caravan master will go bankrupt. He heard about the workshop from a hunter whose hand had been healed there. He came to try it out. Emily examines the horse. She goes down to Dan. She describes the symptoms. Dan asks to be carried over to the hoof. Emily wraps Dan in a cloth and carries him to the horse. She places him against the hoof. Dan scans it. The hoof is keratin, the same material as claws and beaks. The horse's keratin is breaking down from the inside. A fungus, a micro. It lives within the hoof structure and eats it away. Conventional medications don't penetrate the keratin. They work on the surface. The fungus is inside, inaccessible. Dan can reach it. He forms microthreads, thinner than a hair. He guides them into the hoof structure through microcracks. He finds colonies of fungus. He envelops them. He absorbs them, one by one. It takes 2 hours per hoof. 4 hooves, 4 horses, 2 days of work. Dan loses a lot of weight, a lot. But the caravan driver brought a sack of small creatures killed along the way. Dan devours them and recovers. The caravan driver pays in gold, not silver, gold, and promises to spread the word about the workshop in every town along the route. Dan thinks, gold is good, but fame is dangerous. The more people who know, the higher the risk. Somewhere out there are those who seek anomalous slime. The Artifact Guild. He's heard snippets of conversation at the market. An ancient legend. Slime that doesn't grow in size but grows in potential. From its core, one can make a universal reagent. One that transforms any material into any other. They'll pay so much for such slime that you could buy a city. Dan doesn't know for sure if he fits the description, but he suspects he does. And that means every new client is a potential informant. Every cured hunter is a mouth that might let something slip. He tells Haejin about this, at night, when Emily is already asleep. Haejin listens, thinks, then she speaks. We need someone who knows how to keep quiet and make others keep quiet. Dan agrees. They need a third team member, someone who understands the value of silence. 3 days later, Haejin brings a woman to the workshop. Tall, pale, with shoulder-length black hair and a strange scar on her neck. The scar isn't ordinary, it's geometric, lines and angles, a rune, carved into the skin and overgrown with white scar tissue. From Minji, 24 years old, a former priestess of the Temple of the Western Archon. Defrocked, exiled for the heresy of compassion. Haejin found her in a tavern by the southern gate. Minji worked as a waitress. She scrubbed floors. She cleaned cauldrons. As a priestess in the temple, she knew 5 ancient languages. She read scaly tablets thousands of years old. She presided over rituals that maintained the domain's barrier. And now she scrubs floors because no guild will take a defrocked priestess. The temple has marked her. The rune on her neck is the seal of the outcast. Any priest from any temple sees it and knows. She betrayed her order. Minji enters the workshop. She looks around. She is silent. She sits down at the table. Haejin speaks. Show him. Minji looks at the flask, then at the bowl on the table, then at the basement where the stairs lead. She senses it. Priestesses are trained to sense essences. It's their job. To determine a creature's rank, to assess its power, to classify it. She senses Dan, and her eyes widen. She says, "It's impossible. The essence's structure doesn't match its size. Down there is a repository holding the volume of 100 creatures in the body of one small one." Dan emerges from the basement, forms a body. Small, the size of a cat. 4 paws, 2 eyes, a mouth. Sits down on the table, says, "Hello." Minji looks at him. She is silent. Then she says, "You are intelligent." He nods. She says, "I treated wounded monsters. I nursed those who were brought back from the hunt half dead. The temple said it was heresy, that monsters do not deserve compassion, that kindness toward monsters destroys the order of the world. I was expelled." She falls silent, then continues, "If they had seen you, intelligent, speaking, creating things for people, they would have said I was right, or killed us both." She pauses. Dan waits. She says, "I know how to keep quiet. I was taught to keep the temple's secrets. I know ancient languages and can read the tablets. I can sense essences from a distance and warn of danger. I have nowhere to go, and I need a reason to believe that my kindness wasn't a mistake." Dan looks at her, at the rune on her neck, at the hands that scrub strangers' floors, at the eyes in which weariness and hope are in equal measure. He says, "Welcome to Quietwater." Minji nods, once. She stands up, walks to the stairs leading to the second floor, chooses a room, closes the door. An hour later, she comes out. There are no tears in her eyes, but her eyelids are red. The team is growing, 3 people and 1 slime. The front end is expanding. Emily is in charge of alchemy and client relations. Haejin handles security and hunting contracts. Minji is responsible for essence reconnaissance and knowledge of ancient texts. 4th month in Veldrain. Quietwater operates every day except when Haejin takes a hunting contract and the whole team goes beyond the wall. Dan has grown. He's the size of a large cat. The catalog has surpassed 300 entries. Of these, 79 are canonical species. The rest are delta and hybrid data. He can maintain a composite assembly of 5 components for 20 minutes. With 3 components, over an hour. He can't sustain a humanoid form yet. Not enough mass. Not enough data on the human skeleton and muscular structure. But it's working on it. Every patient, every touch, adds a line to the people section. Emily made a discovery. If Dan extracts a pure component from the catalog and Emily fixes it in an alchemical solution, a stable reagent is produced. Without Dan. Autonomous. Lasting for weeks. This means Dan can make batches. He doesn't have to spend a fortune on each client individually. He can prepare a batch of the regenerative compound in advance, store it on a shelf, use it as needed. Scaling up. The first step from manual work to production. But Dan refuses. Emily doesn't understand. She asks why. He explains. Every reagent must be tailored to a specific person. A universal formula works 15 to 20% less effectively. For mild cases, that's acceptable. For serious ones, it isn't. He won't release a product onto the market. He'll make something for a specific person, tailored to them, their pain, their story. Emily argues. She says it's inefficient, that they could help more people. That scale is a blessing. Dan listens, then he speaks. Scale isn't a blessing if it lowers quality. I'm not a pharmacy, I'm a workshop. Emily falls silent. She thinks. Then she nods. Then she takes a notebook and begins to write down the specifications for each client separately. Just like before, but now without objection. Minji contributes in a different way. She doesn't work with clients directly. She works with information. Every evening she sits in the corner of the workshop with an ancient book she brought from the temple. The only thing she took with her when she was exiled. A book in a language that no one in Lowell can read. Minji translates, slowly, 1 page a day. The book describes the hierarchy of the creatures of Veldraine. Not the modern one, the ancient one, the one that's 1,000 years old. Dan listens to her translations at night. He sits on the table, curled up like a little jelly, and listens. Minji reads aloud. Her voice is quiet and steady. The book tells of the times before the Pact of Domains, when the Archons had not yet divided the continent, when creatures devoured one another without rules or limits. Chaos, an endless war of all against all. Then came the 10 strongest, the 10 great dragon Archons. They established the pact. Each received a domain, a territory, the right to all creatures within its borders. In exchange, they stopped devouring one another, equilibrium. It lasted 1,000 years, until Velgaroth broke it. Minji reads about Velgaroth. In the book, he is described as the strangest of the Archons, the youngest, the most unpredictable. He came out of nowhere. He seized the northern domain by force. His essence is unlike that of any other dragon. Dan listens and feels something cold stirring inside him. Not in the catalog, deeper. In that place where not data but hunches come from. Came out of nowhere, essence unlike anyone else's. He notes this, sets an internal tag. Important, return later. In the 5th month, an order arrives that stumps Dan for the first time. A girl, young, a hunter from another city. She came specifically, heard about Quietwater from a caravan driver. She has a skin anomaly. Any fabric she wears is rejected within a day. Her skin reddens. It breaks out in blisters. It itches so badly she can't sleep. She wears only loose shirts made of the finest silk and changes them every day. A normal life is impossible. She can't wear armor. She can't wear normal clothes. She lives in constant discomfort. But that's not all. In a week, she's getting married. Her fiancé is a hunter from Lowell. They've been dating for 2 years. He knows about her condition. He doesn't care. But she does care. She wants a dress. A wedding dress. One that won't burn her skin during the hour-long ceremony. One she can wear and feel beautiful in. For at least one day. Emily goes down to the basement. She explains. Her voice trembles. Dan thinks. Fabric made of chitin and worm slime. The one he made for the seamstress. It won't work. This girl's anomaly is more complex. Her skin doesn't reject a specific material. She rejects anything foreign. Any fabric, any fiber, any covering that isn't part of her body. So the dress has to be part of her body. Or at least appear to be. Dan flips through the catalog. Over 300 entries. Not a single one provides a ready answer. But a combination. Sticky fabric, adhesives, compatibility with foreign surfaces. 8.7. But that's not enough. The girl's skin rejects anything with a compatibility coefficient below 9.5. It needs to be higher. Dan thinks for 2 days. He barely eats. He doesn't speak. Haejin and Emily leave him alone. They already know. When Dan is silent, he's working. On the 3rd day, he finds a solution. Not in the creature catalog, in the human catalog. He scanned dozens of patients, memorized the structure of their tissues, and noticed one thing. Human cells don't reject what smells like themselves. The immune system recognizes self from non-self based on molecular markers on the surface of cells. If you coat tissue with markers that match the markers on a specific person's skin, the body will accept it as its own. Dan needs a sample of her skin, not a piece, a drop. A single shed cell with a full set of markers. He asks Emily to take a skin swab from the girl, a tiny one. Emily takes it, brings it to the basement. Dan absorbs the sample. He doesn't eat it, he reads it. Markers, a unique set. Like a fingerprint, only at the molecular level. Now he can assemble tissue that her body will accept as its own. Dan works for 3 days. He doesn't sleep. Layer by layer, he assembles the material. Again, a spider's silk thread weaver. Thin, strong, elastic. He devoured that spider a month ago. Rank E-. The thread is stronger than steel at a thickness of a micron. Coating, moonfish scales. He got them by accident. A fisherman brought the fish to the guild. The scales shimmer in the moonlight. Silvery, blue, beautiful. Dan asked Haejin to buy a single scale for 3 silver coins, the most expensive purchase of his life. Binding layer, his own essence, a thin film of his body between the threads and the scales. It will hold the structure together, and it will carry the girl's molecular markers. Because Dan knows how to copy markers from an absorbed sample and apply them to his own surface, like the owner's signature on every fiber. The dress. He's assembling it in the basement, thread by thread, scale by scale. A drop of his essence between each layer. This isn't sewing. It's micron-level engineering. Every fiber is laid by hand. Every scale is polished and secured. Every drop of essence is marked. He loses mass, a lot of it. The dress takes up nearly 1/3 of his body. When he finishes, he's the size of an orange. Small, tired. But the dress is ready. It lies on the table in the basement. Silver blue, weightless. As it moves, the fabric shimmers at the edges like moonlight on water. It breathes, literally. The fabric expands and contracts in time with the breath of whoever wears it. Because Dan's essence inside it is alive. It remembers the rhythm. Emily carries the dress upstairs. The girl takes it, carefully, as if it were glass. She holds it against her forearm. She waits. A minute. 5. 10. Nothing. No irritation. No blisters. No itching. She puts on the dress. She stands in front of the mirror. The fabric drapes over her body like a second skin. It moves with her. It shimmers at the edges. The girl stands there. She looks at herself. Then, she sinks into a chair. She covers her face with her hands. Her shoulders shake. She can't speak. Emily stands beside her. She can't speak either. Haejin stands by the door. She's silent. But her jaw is clenched so tightly you can see the muscles in her cheekbones. The wedding is in 4 days. Dan asks for one thing. He wants to be at the ceremony, not as a guest, as part of the dress. A small blue bow on the bride's shoulder, a tiny piece of his essence left in the fabric. He will feel everything, the warmth of the body, the rhythm of the heart, the vibration of laughter. After the wedding, life at the workshop picks up speed. The caravan driver kept his word. He spread the word about quiet water in 4 towns along the route. 2 months later, people from other places began arriving in Lowell, on purpose, with orders that local healers and craftsmen couldn't fulfill. Dan worked every day. The catalog grew. 400 entries, 500. He devoured the samples that customers brought. Scales from rare fish off the southern coast. Feathers from birds of the western realm. Claws from mountain predators not found in the Lowell area. Every sample is a new line, a new tag, a new opportunity. His body mass is growing too. Constant hunting with Haejin, plus the fact that clients often pay with monster carcasses instead of money. By the 6th month, Dan is the size of a large dog. He can maintain a complex 6-part assembly for 15 to 20 minutes, a simple 2 or 3-part one for hours. He still can't manage a humanoid form. He lacks the mass for a full-size skeleton, but he's close. In the 6th month, an event occurs that shifts the balance of power in Lowell. The Hunters Guild posts a red mission on the board. Red missions are top priority. A threat to the city. A nest of poisonous worms in an abandoned mine northeast of the wall. C-rank worms. There are about 50 of them. They're breeding and will reach the water table in a month or two. They'll poison the water. 4,000 people will be left without drinking water. The guild has tried to clear the nest twice. Both times the teams retreated. The worms live in tunnels. Narrow. Dark. Poisonous gas fills the space. Hunters can't breathe for more than a few minutes. The worms can. Home field advantage. Haejin looks at the red mission, then at Dan in the pouch she's carried openly inside her bag ever since the team formed. Dan is already thinking. Narrow tunnels, poisonous gas, 50 C-rank creatures. For a group of hunters, this is a deadly mission. For him. He formulates a plan. The worms are dangerous in the tunnels because they control the environment. The gas, the note, narrow passages. People have a hard time in there. But Dan isn't human. He doesn't need to breathe. The gas is harmless to gel. Darkness is no obstacle. He has an owl's eyes and a bat's echolocation. Narrow passages. He's liquid. He'll squeeze through where a human would get stuck. He can do this alone. He shouldn't, but he can. Dan says to Haejin, "I'll go alone." She's silent. Then she says, "No." He explains, "Humans can't work in those tunnels. The gas will kill them in minutes. He's the only one who'll survive inside." Haejin says, "You'll lose mass, maybe a lot of mass. If 50 C-rank worms pile on top of you, you won't make it out." Dan replies, "I won't fight them head on." He lays out the plan. The worms coordinate through vibrations in the ground. Like those ticks use pheromones. If you kill the queen, the rest lose coordination. They get disoriented, they panic, they scatter. He doesn't need to kill 50 worms. He needs to kill one, the most important one, the queen. Haejin listens, thinks, speaks. "I'll wait at the entrance. If you don't come out in 3 hours, I'm going inside." Dan wants to object. Doesn't object. He nods. The night before the sortie, he prepares the assembly, a special one, for the tunnels. The body is elongated, snake-like, 1.5 meters long, 10 centimeters in diameter. Chitinous armor along its entire length. Ash snake scales for fire resistance. Owl eyes at the front. Mouse echolocation. Poison glands of 3 species combined into a single toxin enhanced by a cross-reaction. Toxicity 4.7, enough to paralyze a C-rank creature in 30 seconds. And most importantly, vibration sensors. He assembled them from the sensory antennae of 4 different insect species. They detect ground vibrations at a distance of up to 50 meters. He'll sense every worm in the tunnel long before it senses him. In the morning, they head out. Haejin, Emily, Minji, and Dan in his snake suit wrapped around Hagen's neck like a scarf. It looks strange from the outside. Haejin with a shiny blue scarf that sometimes flickers. They reach the mine in 2 hours. The entrance is in the rock, dark. A sour smell wafts out of it. Gas. It stings the eyes even from the outside. Haejin stops at the entrance. Emily opens the first aid kit. Minji sits down on a rock and closes her eyes. She begins to sense the essence inside. She counts. A minute later, she opens her eyes. She speaks. 47. The womb lies deep inside, 300 meters from the entrance. It's 3 times larger than the rest. Dan unwraps himself from Haejin's neck. It stretches out on the ground. A 5-foot-long blue snake with chitinous scales and a pair of yellow eyes. Haejin places a hand on its head. She is silent. Then she removes her hand. Dan slips into the tunnel. Darkness. Instant. Total. The owl's eyes are useless. No light at all. Dan switches to echolocation. The world turns into a map of sound reflections. Walls, floor, ceiling, branches. The tunnel branches out like a tree's root system. A main trunk and dozens of offshoots. Vibration sensors pick up movement. Ahead, about 20 meters away, 2 worms, small, patrols. Dan slows down, presses himself against the wall, activates his chitin camouflage. The surface color changes to gray, the color of stone. The worms crawl past. They don't notice him. Dan moves on. The tunnel narrows. It widens. Narrows again. In one spot, the passage is no wider than a fist. Dan squeezes himself down, squeezes through the gap. reorients his body on the other side. A human couldn't get through here. A hunter in armor would get stuck solid. Dan moves on, counts the worms by their vibrations. 10, 20, 30. They're everywhere. In the walls, in the floor, in the ceiling. Curled up in burrows, sleeping, waiting. The gas thickens. Dan senses its chemical composition through his skin. Hydrogen sulfide, ammonia, and a third substance, organic, a product of the worm's metabolism. For a human, it's death in 5 minutes. For Dan, it's data, a new entry in the catalog. Worm poison gas. Composition, concentration, temperature. 100 meters, 200. The tunnel widens into a chamber, a large one. Dan stops at the entrance. He turns on his echolocation at full power. A chamber, about 15 meters in diameter. The ceiling is high. And in the center, the queen. He senses her through the vibrations. Huge. 5 meters long, as thick as a barrel, dozens of small worms around her, curled, sleeping, guarding. Dan counts. 22 worms in the chamber, plus the queen. The rest are in the tunnels. A head-on attack is impossible. 22 C-rank worms against a single E-rank slime. Even in snake form, he wouldn't last a minute. But he doesn't need a head-on attack. He needs one bite. Dan waits. An hour. 2. He watches through the vibration sensors. The worms move. They leave. They come. A patrol rhythm. Every 40 minutes, the chamber empties partially. The worms retreat into the tunnels to bypass. 5 or 6 remain nearby, along with the queen. Dan waits for the next cycle. The worms leave. 6 remain. Dan glides into the chamber, along the wall, across the ceiling, using his adhesive tissue. Adhesive tissue keeps him on the stone surface. He crawls over the heads of the sleeping worms, slowly, quietly. He reaches the center of the chamber. The queen. She's down below. Right beneath him. Dan forms a concentrated drop of venom at the tip of his tail. Maximum toxicity. All he has. A combination of 3 poisons enhanced by a cross-reaction. Plus something new. A nerve toxin from the nervous system of one of the devoured creatures. Not poison. A neuroblocker. It stops the transmission of signals along the nerves. The queen coordinates the swarm through vibrations. The vibrations are created by uterine contractions. Muscles contract in response to nerve signals. No signals, no vibrations. No vibrations, no coordination. Dan falls. From the ceiling, right onto the queen. It sinks into her body with the tip of its tail, injects venom. That's it, in a single second. The queen twitches, writhes, slams her body against the chamber floor. Dan is flung aside. He crashes into the wall, loses 15% of his mass from the impact. Pieces of chitinous armor fly off. 6 nearby worms wake up. They rush toward the queen, not toward Dan, toward the queen. They sense she is wounded. The queen thrashes, then slows down. The poison is working. The neuroblocker shuts down the nervous system section by section. In a minute, the queen stops moving. In 2, she is motionless. The worms are all around her. Panic. They sense that the vibrational signal has vanished. Coordination has collapsed. They dart around the chamber. They collide with one another. They crash into the walls. Dan presses himself against the ceiling. He waits. 10 minutes later, the worms begin to scatter. Without the queen, they are no longer a swarm. They are loners, frightened, disoriented. They retreat into the tunnels, deeper, further from the surface. Instinct drives them downward. The chamber empties. Dan descends. He crawls toward the queen, dead, huge, 5 meters of flesh and chitin. Dan begins to devour her, slowly. A C-rank womb, 2 ranks above him, the limit of what's permissible. He can't consume it whole without risk. The essence of a being stronger than him will begin to resist, to rewrite, to change him from within. Dan consumes cautiously, not the entire carcass, selected parts, the nervous system, the coordination center, the vibrating organs, high-quality chitin plates. He leaves the rest. He immediately catalogs every absorbed fragment, tags it, indexes it. He doesn't let the foreign essence dissolve inside him into a shapeless blob. He maintains the structure. He controls the process. An hour later, he's done. The catalog has been updated with 12 entries in Category C. His mass has been restored and increased. He is larger than he was, almost as big as a sheepdog. Dan crawls out of the shaft 2.5 hours after entering. Haejin stands at the entrance, with a bow in his hands, drawn. She's been aiming at the tunnel for the last half hour. Dan steps into the light. His snake-like form is battered. His chitin is cracked. Several eyes are missing, but he's alive. Haejin lowers her bow. She looks at him. He unravels his form. Returns to a jelly-like state. A large jelly, the size of a big dog. Emily runs up. She starts examining him. Minji opens her eyes. She counts. She speaks. The womb is gone. The swarm is scattered. 31 worms have gone deeper. 16 are dead in the tunnels. The nest is destroyed. Haejin sits down next to Dan. She is silent. Then she speaks. Don't do that again. Dan wants to ask what exactly, but he knows the answer. Don't go alone to a place from which you might not return. He stays silent. She's right, but he knows he'll do it again if he has to, and she knows that too. They return to the city. Haejin turns in the quest at the guild. The red slip is taken off the board. The woman behind the counter looks at Haejin with an expression Dan can't quite place. Surprise, respect, and something else. Wariness. 3 days later, the Lowell City Council issues Haejin a document. Guild Partner. A status usually granted to artisans and healers working for the guild. The 7th month. Quietwater is known far beyond Lowell. Caravans make a detour to stop in the city. Merchants know. Here you can fix what can't be fixed anywhere else. Cure what can't be cured. Get something you can't get anywhere else. Dan works non-stop. Medicines, materials, tools, living prosthetics made from the adhesive tissue of the sticky ones, tissues for people with abnormalities, reagents for alchemists, ink that won't fade for 1,000 years, made from the pigment of the deep-water octopus, unbreakable glass fused from an owl's cornea and beetle chitin. Every item is personalized. Each bears a tiny drop of his essence, signed by the owner. Every drop remembers who it belongs to. If an item is stolen, it stops working within a day. Dan's essence inside recognizes foreign hands and shuts down. Built-in anti-theft protection, an anti-piracy system. Dan finds this amusing. The 4th member of the team finds them on their own, or rather, she does. Riley O'Brien, 22 years old, a grasshopper mechanic, petite, muscular, with freckles and hands perpetually burned. She comes to the workshop not as a customer, as a supplier, carrying a bag of parts, hinges, axles, springs, fasteners, prosthetics. She makes mechanical prosthetics for hunters who have lost limbs. Dan hears her talking to Emily upstairs. Her voice is loud, deep for a woman, direct, no niceties. She says she heard about a workshop that makes living implants. She says it's nonsense, that mechanics are more reliable than biology, that metal doesn't rot or get sick, that she came to prove it. Emily calls for Dan. He climbs up from the basement in the form of a cat. Riley looks at him, at the blue gel with eyes and little paws. She doesn't scream. She isn't scared. She frowns. She speaks. "This is your master," he says. "Yes," she says. "Prove that your stuff is better than mine." Dan asks, "Why?" She is silent. Then she says, "I have a brother, Connor. He lost both legs in battle 2 years ago. I made him prosthetics, the best I could. Metal, springs, hinges, leather straps. He walks, but his body is rejecting the metal. The skin on his stumps gets inflamed, an infection every 2 months. He's getting weaker, slowly. The prosthetics are killing him, but without them, he can't walk at all." She falls silent, clenches her fists. Her scorched fingers turn white at the knuckles. She speaks. "If you can do better, do it. If not, I'll leave and never come back." Dan says, "Bring him here." 3 days later, Riley brings her brother, Connor O'Brien, 25 years old, former hunter, broad-shouldered, red-haired. He sits in a wheelchair that Riley made for him out of 100 an old cart. Metal prostheses stand in the corner. He hasn't worn them for the past week. It's too painful. The stumps are bandaged. The bandages are brown with blood. Dan examines the stumps. He touches them through the stump. He scans them. The inflammation is deep. The metal has left marks in the tissue, microparticles of rust in the muscles. The immune system is working at its limit. Another 6 months with these prostheses and sepsis will set in. Dan thinks for 3 days. He goes through the catalog. 530 entries. A leg prosthesis isn't a shoulder implant. It's a different scale, a different level of complexity. Legs must bear the body's weight. They must bend at the knee. They must sense the surface. They must fuse with the stump so there's no place between the living and the artificial. He finds the answer in a creature he devoured 2 months ago, the creeping root, rank D-. A carnivorous plant from the northern swamps. Its roots grow into the soil and become part of it. indistinguishable from the earth, living, sensitive, shifting shape under pressure. The root of the creeping root. If he uses its structure as the basis for a prosthesis, he'll get something. Not metal, not bone. Plant organic, soft, strong, alive. Growing into the tissue through the adhesive base of the sticky ones, sensitive through the lizard's nerve endings, flexible through the runner's muscle fibers. Dan is assembling the prototype. Left leg, from the knee down, foot, toes, joint, every element from the catalog, a root structure like a skeleton, an adhesive layer for bonding to the stump, a regenerative layer for continuous tissue renewal, nerve fibers for sensitivity, muscle bundles for movement, a covering made of a composite of chitin and elastic salamander skin. Feels like warm skin to the touch, slightly greenish in color, but alive. Installation takes 6 hours. Dan works on it personally. Micronites from his body enter the stump tissue. They connect the human nerve endings to the prosthetic nerve fibers. They connect the muscles to the muscle bundles. An adhesive base wraps around the bone and fuses to it. In 48 hours, the prosthesis will become part of the body, indivisible. Connor lies on the bed, silent. Riley is beside him, holding his hand. Her face is set. Her eyes are red. She isn't crying. She's holding herself back. Dan is attaching the second leg. 6 more hours. By morning, both stumps are covered. Greenish feet lie on the bed. The toes twitch slightly. Nerve connections are establishing contact. Connor feels it. His eyes widen. He speaks. I can feel the floor, the cold floor. Through the prosthesis, he feels the surface temperature. This is impossible for a metal leg. But his legs are no longer metal. In 2 days, the bonding is complete. Connor stands up. Riley and Haejin hold him by the arms. He takes a step. His foot touches the floor. His toes spread out. They adjust to the surface, like roots. A second step, a third. He walks. Unsteadily, swaying, but he walks. On his own legs, which are greenish and a little strange, but his own. Riley stands in the doorway, watching. Her face. Dan sees it through the eye on the wall where he's set up his observation post. The face of a small, stern woman who spent 2 years making metal prosthetics for her brother, knowing they were killing him. Because there was nothing better. And now there is. Riley turns, walks into the hallway, closes the door. Dan hears a single sound through the wall, short, muffled. She's crying. For the first time in front of witnesses, even if there are no witnesses. There's slime in the wall that hears everything. A week later, Riley comes to Dan. She sits down at the table. She places a blueprint on the table. She says, I want to work with you, not on you, with you. You do biology. Year 1, 12 months in Veldrain. Dan sums it up as usual, in numbers. Catalog, 641 entries, 112 canonical species, 529 deltas. Tags, over 2,000 unique parameters. Body mass, 23 kilograms in base form, size of a large wolf. Composite builds, up to 7 components simultaneously. Duration up to 25 minutes for complex ones, up to 3 hours for simple ones. Humanoid form, test passed 2 weeks ago, can maintain human form for up to 40 minutes. Then it falls apart, but 40 minutes is 40 minutes. Workshop, 143 clients per year, 139 successful, 4 failures. Income is stable, enough for rent, food, materials, and a small stockpile. Team, Haejin, senior hunter, advanced to rank B-, shoulder fully healed. Her family bow works perfectly. She's the best marksman in Lowell, and that's no secret to anyone anymore. Emily, analytical alchemist, keeps a journal and runs the lab. Developed 12 stable recipes based on Dan's catalog. Her notebooks contain documentation that any pharmaceutical company would envy. Minji, translator and navigator through the realms, has translated a third of the ancient book. She knows the location and power of every creature within a 500-meter radius. A living radar. Riley, mechanical engineer. She set up a forge in the workshop courtyard. She makes tools and frames for hybrid prosthetics. Her hands are just as burned as they were on the first day. She considers this normal. Everything is fine. Too good. Dan can feel it. An engineer's intuition. When a system runs perfectly for long enough, you stop seeing the strain building up somewhere beyond the monitoring. The strain comes in the form of a man. Tall, thin, about 45, in a long gray cloak, with a sword at his belt that looks like it's been used every day for the last 20 years. The blade is sharpened to razor's edge, but the hilt is worn white. He enters the workshop at noon. Emily is behind the counter. Haejin is out hunting. Minji is in the basement with Dan, translating another page. Riley is in the forge. The man approaches the counter. He says one word, a name, not his own, Dan's, he says. Slime. Emily smiles. She says she doesn't understand what he's talking about, that this is a pharmacy and a workshop, that there's no slime here. The man looks at her. His eyes are gray, unmoving, like stones at the bottom of a stream. He speaks. 3 months ago, a caravan driver from Lowell told a story in the port city of Selden about a workshop where the incurable are cured. A month ago in the town of Crest, a hunter showed a hand on which a scar had healed in 3 days. A week ago in this very Lowell, a woman walked around in a dress that breathes. He pauses. He says, I know it's here. I need to find it. Emily is silent. Her face is calm, but Dan sees through the sensory thread in the floor that her pulse has jumped to 120. She says, Who are you? The man replies, Silas Morn. Dan hears the name from the basement and feels something inside him tighten. Not in the catalog. Deeper. Silas Morn. He's heard that name at the market, in the tavern, in the hunter's conversations. The man who killed the Archon. Not one of the 10 great ones, a junior one. A regional Archon of SS- rank. Still an Archon. Still a dragon. And this man killed him. Alone. Minji is next to Dan in the basement. Her eyes are closed. She senses Silas's essence. Her face pales. She whispers, Rank A+, at least, maybe S. He's stronger than anything I've ever felt. Dan is rank E. There's a chasm between them, not 2 steps. 10. Minji opens her eyes, looks at Dan, speaks. He won't leave until he finds you. Dan thinks. Quickly. Options. Run. Where? The workshop is here. The team is here. Everything he's been building for a year is here. Hide. From the man who killed the Archon, who's been tracking Dan for 3 months on scraps of rumors. He won't stop looking. Fight. Pointless. Talk. The only option. Dan rises from the basement, not in cat form. In full combat mode. A 7-part assembly. A wolf's body. Chitin armor. A snake's scales. An owl's eyes. A hound's claws. Poisonous spikes. Vibration sensors. He steps out from the door into the workshop. 23 kilograms of living weaponry on 4 legs. Silas looks at him. Doesn't flinch. Doesn't grab his sword. Just looks. Gray eyes assess. Scan. Just as Minji senses essences, so he senses threat. And apparently doesn't sense it, because he relaxes his shoulders slightly. Dan speaks. You were looking. You found it. What you need. His voice is low, hoarse. It comes from the chest of a wolf's body through the vocal apparatus that Dan has been perfecting for months. Silas looks. Then he speaks. You speak. Dan replies. Yes. Silas is silent. Then he sits down on a chair. He places his hands on the table. Open palms. A gesture that means the same here as it does on Earth. I'm not threatening you, he says. I need help. Dan has no eyebrows to raise, but he tilts his head. A gesture of surprise in a dog's body. Silas speaks. He has a daughter, Mira, 16 years old. She is sick. A dragon's curse, a type of curse that a dragon leaves in a wound after a bite. Silas killed the Archon 3 years ago. But before he died, the Archon bit Mira, who was with her father in that battle. She wasn't supposed to be there. She had run away from camp and followed her father. And the Archon got her, 1 bite, on her left side. The wound healed in a week, but the curse remained inside. It's growing, slowly, 1 millimeter a day. Scales are sprouting beneath her skin. Her bones are changing structure. In a year, Mira will cease to be human. She will become something in between, a half-dragon, a half-human. Without a mind, without memory, without a chance. Silas traveled the entire continent. Every healer, every alchemist, every priest. No one can remove the dragon's curse. It has grown in too deep. It is part of Mira's body. To cut it out would mean cutting out half her organs. Then he heard about a workshop in Lowell, about a being who can break essences down into components, extract one property from another, separate the foreign from the self at the molecular level. He traveled for 3 months. He did not come to kill. He came to ask. Dan listens, catalogs every word. Dragon corruption. A dragon's essence implanted in a human body, growing, devouring, replacing human tissue with dragon tissue. This is his territory. This is exactly what he does. Separates one essence from another, indexes, extracts what's needed, removes the excess. But a dragon is not a tick or a worm. A dragon is SS- rank. Even a fragment of its essence could be more powerful than anything in Dan's catalog. An attempt to absorb the dragon's corruption could destroy Dan. The dragon's essence will begin to rewrite him from the inside. He'll become not Dan, but a piece of dragon in a slime's body. The risk, enormous. Dan looks at Silas, at his hands, open palms on the table. The palms that killed the Archon, and which now lie open before the E-rank slime. Because his daughter is dying, Dan says, "Bring her here, I'll take a look. I can't promise anything, but I'll take a look." Silas stands up, nods, walks away, stops at the threshold, speaks without turning around. "If you cure her, I'll owe you my life. And I pay my debts." The door closes. Emily exhales, her hands are shaking. Minji climbs up from the basement, pale. Riley stands in the smithy doorway with a hammer in her hand. She heard everything. Dan disassembles his combat gear, sits down on the table, small, blue, 23 kilograms. Against a world where there are Archons and Archon killers and daughters who die from dragon bites. He thinks. He needs more data. He needs a dragon's essence, at least a piece, at least a scale, to understand what he's dealing with. Before he goes into a 16-year-old girl's body and tries to pull a dragon out of there, he turns to the team. 4 women, 4 pairs of eyes. Everyone is looking at him. He says, "I need a dragon scale. A real one, not from a store, from a living or recently dead dragon. And I need it before Silas brings his daughter." Haejin is silent. Then she says, "I know where to look." And Dan realizes that the quiet life of the workshop is over. Something new is beginning. Something that's making his catalog burst at the seams. But he's an engineer. It's his job. When the system is at its limit, to find a way to expand it. Or break trying. Haejin knows the place. 2 days' journey north, Broken Fang Gorge. That's where 3 years ago Silas killed the junior Archon. The dragon's body was long since stripped away by scavengers and trophy hunters. But Haejin says that scales fused into the stone remain at the battle site. The heat of the dying Archon melted the rock, and the scales grew into the bedrock. No one could pry them out. Too deep. Too hard, Dan thinks. The scales of a dead SS- rank dragon fused into the stone. Even in death, it carries its essence. Weakened, but still dragon-like. Enough to understand the structure, to build a model, to prepare to work with the corruption in Mira's body. They set out the next morning, the whole team. Haejin leads the way, bow on his back, quiver full. Emily carries a bag of reagents and tools. Minji walks with her eyes closed every 100 steps. She senses the essences around her, a living radar. Riley hauls a backpack on her back with tools for working with stone. Chisels, hammers, pliers. Dan is in Haejin's bag, in the form of a dense sphere, saves weight. The journey north is harder than Dan expected. Beyond the Loa wall, the world is different. The forest thickens. The trees are taller, darker, with blue bark and leaves that move without wind. The creatures are larger, more aggressive. On the first day, Minji counts 11 entities of rank C and above within a 500-meter radius. They bypass each one. They spend the night in a crevice. Dan sets up sensory threads around the perimeter, a living alarm system. The night passes without incident. On the second day, they reach the gorge. Dan sees it through the eye on the surface of the bag and understands why it's called Broken Fang. The rock is split in two. The two halves jut out of the ground like the shards of a giant tooth. Between them is a chasm 30 meters deep. At the bottom, the rocks are melted. The walls of the gorge are black from heat that's been there for 3 years. A dragon died here. Minji stops at the edge. She closes her eyes, opens them a minute, pale as chalk. He speaks. Residual essence. Everywhere. The walls, the stones, the air. The Archon has been dead for 3 years, but his essence has permeated the rock. Weak, but it is here. Dan emerges from the bag. He forms a body. 4 paws. Eyes. He stands at the edge of the gorge and senses what Minji is talking about. Pressure. Heavy. Ancient. Even in death it presses down, like the echo of an explosion trapped within the walls. They descend, carefully, using a rope. Dan slides down the wall on his own. At the bottom, Haejin finds scales, 3 of them, fused into the rock 5 or 6 centimeters deep, dark red, the size of a palm. Around the edges, the melted rock has fused with the scales into a monolith. Riley gets to work, chisel and hammer. He strikes the rock around the scale. The rock won't budge. The melted rock is harder than ordinary granite. Riley strikes harder. The chisel slips. Sparks. The rock doesn't move a millimeter. Dan speaks up. "Let me try." He crawls up to the flake, extends a tendril, touches the stone around it, feels the structure. The rock has fused from the heat, but beneath the layer of molten rock is ordinary granite. If he can penetrate beneath the molten layer, he can break the bond from the inside. Dan forms microthreads, thinner than a hair. He guides them into the rock's microcracks. He searches for the boundary between the melted layer and the ordinary stone. He finds it. He fills it with microthreads. He expands it, slowly, by the micron. Like water that freezes in a crack and shatters the rock, only faster. After 2 hours of work, the stone around the first scale cracks. Riley hooks it with tongs, pulls. The scale comes out of the stone with a crunch. Dark red, heavy. Hot to the touch, even though the dragon has been dead for 3 years. The essence within it is alive, asleep, but alive. Minji takes a step back. She speaks, carefully. Dan is careful. He doesn't swallow the scale right away. He places it in cold storage, mentally wraps it in a layer of insulation. No activation, no contact with the main database. Quarantine. Like a suspicious file in a sandbox. They extract all 3 scales. Dan takes 2. He gives the third to Emily for alchemical analysis. On the way back, they're attacked. A quartet of gray reapers, C+ rank, large, fast, fangs like sabers. Haejin takes out the first one on the run, an arrow to the eye, clean. The second one lunges at Minji. Dan intercepts, assembling on the fly, armor, claws, poisoned spikes. He strikes the reaper in the side. The poison takes effect. The creature staggers. It falls 10 seconds later. The third and fourth attack simultaneously. Haejin takes the third, an arrow to the neck. Riley hits the fourth with a hammer, doesn't kill it, stuns it. Dan finishes it off. The fight takes 40 seconds, clean, well coordinated. The team works as a single unit, everyone in their place. Everyone knows what they're doing. Dan absorbs the slasher's carcass, catalogs it. New C+ rank data, useful. They return to Lowell. Dan goes down to the basement and starts working on the dragon scale, carefully, microgram by microgram. He takes a scale out of cold storage, doesn't absorb the whole thing, chips off a tiny fragment, the size of a speck of dust, absorbs it, and the world inside him explodes. A single speck of dragon essence and his catalog cracks. Data, vast, dense, multi-dimensional. Every dragon scale contains more information than all 600 entries in his catalog combined. This is not a creature, this is a library. Dan grabs hold of the structure, holds on, doesn't let the speck dissolve. Indexes. Tags, breaks it down into components. Fire resistance 9.8, durability 9.5, regeneration 8.7, magical conductivity 9.1, and hundreds more parameters he's never seen before that aren't in his tagging system. He has to create new categories on the fly. The process takes 3 days. Dan doesn't leave the basement, doesn't eat, doesn't speak. Silas brings Mira 4 days later. She's small, skinny, dark hair. Her eyes are large, gray, like her father's, but in her left eye, the pupil is stretched vertically, like a cat's, like a reptile's. The dragon's curse is changing her. She walks on her own, but slowly. The left side of her body doesn't move like the right, in jerks. Under her shirt on her left side, you can see the skin bulging. Scales, growing beneath the skin, breaking through in several places. Dark red, like those scales from the gorge. Silas leads her by the hand, the right one. She presses her left hand against her body. Her left hand is no longer quite human. Her fingers are slightly longer than they should be. Her nails are thickened. They're starting to curve. Claws. In 6 months, they'll be full-fledged claws. In a year, she won't have human hands. Dan examines her in the basement. Minji is nearby. Silas stands by the stairs. His hand is on the hilt of his sword. He's not threatening. He simply can't help himself. The habit of a man who has spent his whole life waiting for a blow. Dan touches Mira's skin with the tip of his finger. He scans her and sees the scale of the problem. The curse is not a parasite, not a foreign body, not a toxin that can be neutralized. The curse is the essence of a dragon fused with the essence of a human, intertwined, sewn together. At the cellular level, every cell in Mira contains both human and dragon information, like 2 files written to the same disk sector, overlapping each other. An attempt to delete one will destroy the other. You can't cut out the dragon without cutting out the girl. Dan is silent for a long time. Minji looks at him. She waits. Silas waits. Mira sits in a chair and swings her legs. The right one normally, the left one in jerks. Dan thinks. A classic deduplication problem. 2 data sets on a single medium. They need to be separated without deletion. Don't cut out the dragon, isolate it. Create a separate storage space for it. Move it there, leaving the human part untouched. But to do that, one must distinguish one from the other. In every cell, in every tissue, in every organ. We need a reference copy of Mira's human essence, pure, uncorrupted, which she hasn't had for 3 years. Or maybe she does. Dan asks Silas, "Is there anything belonging to Mira from before the bite? Hair, teeth, blood on a cloth, anything with her old, pure essence." Silas is silent, then he reaches into his pocket, pulls out a small locket, opens it. Inside, a lock of hair. A child's. "Light," he says. Her mother cut off the lock when Mira was 3, before she died, 13 years ago. A child's essence, pure, untainted, different from the essence of 16-year-old Mira, but the baseline, the canonical one, a master copy against which to check the deltas. Dan takes the lock, absorbs a single hair. He doesn't eat it, he reads it, and he gets the reference. Mira's pure human essence at the age of 3, a complete record, all markers, all parameters, all tags. Now he has something to compare it to. He can go through every cell in Mira's body, check against the standard. Anything that doesn't match is the dragon. Anything that matches is her. The procedure will take time, a lot of time. Dan estimates, thousands of micro-operations. Every cell where the corruption is grown into human tissue. They need to be separated, carefully, one by one, like separating 2 intertwined roots without breaking a single one. He tells Silas, "It's possible, but it will take 2 weeks of non-stop work. And it will hurt, for me. Every contact with the dragon's essence will put pressure on my catalog, trying to rewrite me. I'll have to resist every second." Silas looks at him. He says, "You'll do it." Not a question, a statement. Dan replies, "Yes." He starts that very day. Mira lies down on the bed in the basement. Dan wraps his body around her left side in a thin layer. Contact, complete, every cell under his sensors. He begins scanning, cell by cell, comparing to the standard, marking the affected areas, mapping the corruption. The first day is spent mapping. Result: the corruption has affected 23% of the body, the left side, the left arm, part of the left leg, the left eye, the edge of the left lung, the spleen. Everywhere, the dragon's essence has grown into the human, intertwined, fused. Day 2. Dan begins the separation. He takes the first cell, compares it to the standard, identifies the dragon component, separates it, transfers it into himself, into cold storage, into quarantine. 1 cell, 3 seconds. Next, 3 seconds. Next. Thousands of cells per hour, tens of thousands per day. He works non-stop. The team takes turns at Mira's bedside. Haejin monitors her condition, pulse, breathing, temperature. Emily prepares supportive compounds, nutrients, painkillers. Minji monitors the balance of essences, ensuring the human part doesn't lose its integrity while the dragon part is being removed. Riley stands by the basement door, with a hammer, just in case something goes wrong. Mira sleeps most of the time. Emily mixes a sleeping potion into her drink. It's easier that way, for her and for Dan. Silas sits on the staircase steps. He doesn't leave. He doesn't sleep. He eats what Haejin brings him. He's silent. The 4th day. Dan reaches the deepest layers of corruption. Here the dragon has clung on tighter. The separation is harder. Every cell resists. The dragon's essence doesn't want to leave. It clings on, pulls back. Dan holds on. He tears it away, one by one. His database groans under the load. New data from the dragon's essence presses against the structure, trying to overwrite the indexes, to knock down the tags. He spends half his computational resources maintaining order within himself. Day 7. Half the corruption has been extracted. Mira wakes up, opens her eyes. Her left pupil is less vertical than a week ago, almost round. She looks at Dan, at the blue gel covering her left side. She speaks. It tickles. Dan almost loses his concentration. Day 10, 70%. Dan has lost 1/3 of his weight. The dragon essence in the cold storage is twists from within. Heavy, dense, demands space, demands attention. He is restructuring the vault's architecture on the fly, creating additional layers of isolation. Every fragment of the dragon's essence is wrapped in 3 layers of quarantine. Day 12, 90%. Only the deep foci remain, the spleen, the edge of the lung, the most difficult ones. Here the dragon has taken root in vital organs. One wrong move and Mira will die from internal bleeding. Dan works more slowly. 1 cell every 10 seconds, 20, 30. Each division is like open-heart surgery performed with microscopic threads inside a living body. The 13th day. Dan reaches the last focus. Tiny, the size of a pea, in the lung wall, the densest, the most stubborn. The dragon's essence has condensed into a core here, concentrated, resistant. Dan takes hold of it. He pulls. The essence pulls back. A tug of war at the cellular level. Dan loses. His threads snap. The essence strikes him from within. He loses control over part of the catalog. 20 entries fall out of the index. Chaos. Dan regains control, re-indexes, restores, grabs the core again, this time differently. Doesn't pull, envelops, surrounds, isolates it from the rest of the body, like a capsule. The core inside his tissue inside Mira's body. 3 layers, human, Dan, dragon. Then slowly, molecule by molecule, he pulls the core out of the lung wall, replacing the dragon's tissue with the lizard's regenerative tissue, cell by cell, lizard instead of dragon, human instead of alien. The 14th day, morning. Dan separates from Mira's body, curls up on the basement floor, small, 14 kilograms. He has lost nearly half his mass, but the catalog is intact. The structure holds. And Mira opens her eyes. Both pupils are round, human. She raises her left hand. Her fingers are normal. Her nails are normal. The skin on her left side is smooth, pink, no scales. She sits up on the bed. She looks at her hands, at her body, then at her father, who is standing on the stairs and looking at her. Silas Morn, the man who killed the Archon. He stands on the stairs, his hands trembling. Mira speaks. "Dad, I can feel my left hand, all of it." Silas comes down, sits on the edge of the bed, takes her left hand, squeezes it. He's silent, his face is still. But there's a streak running down his cheek, just one. He doesn't wipe it away. Dan is lying on the floor, small, emaciated. But inside him it's calm. The catalog is working. The patient is healthy. Mission accomplished. Close the ticket. Silas doesn't leave. After Mira gets to her feet and starts walking normally for the first time in 3 years, he sits at the table in the workshop. He's silent for an hour. Then he speaks. "I owe you my life. How do I pay you back?" Dan answers without hesitation. "With protection." Silas nods. He stands up. He leaves. He returns in 2 hours with his things. He takes a room on the 2nd floor next to Riley's. From this day on, the workshop has an A+ rank security guard, the best fighter on half the continent. Mira stays too. She helps Emily in the lab, a quiet girl, serious. She takes after her father in her eyes and after her mother, whom she doesn't remember, in everything else. Dan recovers over 3 weeks. He eats a lot, voraciously. Haejin brings back carcasses from every hunt. Riley makes arrangements with the butchers at the market. Emily cooks up nutrient-rich concoctions. His weight is increasing. By the end of the 3rd week, he's back up to 23 kilograms. Then he surpasses that, 25, 27, 30. The dragon essence in the cold storage isn't just lying there. It's working, slowly, quietly. It changes him from the inside. It doesn't rewrite him. He didn't let it do that. But it enriches him. His catalog has expanded. New categories of data that didn't exist before. Magical conductivity, domain resonance, Archon signal hierarchy. Things he couldn't even perceive before coming into contact with the dragon essence. Now he can. In the 4th week of recovery, Dan tries to grow a plate of armor. Not chitinous, dragon scale. From a scale in the cold storage, carefully. 1 plate, on the back of his right front paw. A scale forms, dark red, smooth, harder than anything in his catalog. Strength 9.5, fire resistance 9.8. 1 scale, and his paw becomes invulnerable. Dan looks at it, then puts it back in the storage. Too soon. Way too soon. He needs more control, more data, more mass. But he knows. When the time comes, he'll be able to. Month 14. The fifth team member appears not through the door, through the window, at night. With the sound of shattering glass, Dan wakes up in the basement. The sensor threads in the walls scream. Intrusion. Second floor, Emily's window. Haejin is already on her feet, bow in hand. Silas at the door with a sword, Riley with a hammer. Minji reads the intruder's essence. Her face is surprised. She speaks. Small, rank C, a dragon. They go upstairs. A creature is sitting on the floor in Emily's room. Small, about the size of a large cat, scaly, with wings folded behind its back. A long tail wraps around a chair leg. Its eyes are huge, golden, with vertical pupils. A little dragon, a baby. It sits amid shards of glass and looks at the people around it. Not afraid, not aggressive, just looking. Then it turns its head toward the basement door, looks down, at Dan, who is climbing the stairs, and makes a sound, short, high-pitched, like a click. Then another, and lunges at him, slams into his body at full speed, buries its snout in the jelly, freezes. It clicks, it hisses, it pokes him with its nose. Dan stands there. He doesn't move. The little dragon presses itself against him, with its whole body. Small, warm, smooth scales. Its heart beats so fast that the vibration travels through Dan's entire body. Minji speaks softly. It's one of the cast-offs, the eggs the Archons cast down into the lower lands. This one hatched somewhere nearby, and came here, to the point. She pauses. Then she says, "He thinks you're his mother." Dan looks at the little dragon. The little dragon looks at Dan. Golden eyes, vertical pupils. The absolute trust of a creature that has just hatched and seen for the first time the one who smells like a dragon. Because Dan has a dragon's essence in the cold storage room. But the scent seeps through. Dan is an engineer. He isn't sentimental. He's practical. And a practical engineer understands that a wild C-rank baby dragon in the workshop is a problem. A big problem. It needs to be let go, or handed over to the guild, or... The little dragon clicks, buries its nose in Dan, closes its eyes, falls asleep. A small, warm lump of scales and trust on blue jelly. Dan thinks, then thinks some more, then says, "All right, her name is Lulu." The name just comes to him. Dan doesn't know where from. Maybe from a past life, maybe from some movie. It doesn't matter. Lulu doesn't speak. She hisses and clicks. But she understands intonation. She understands gestures. She understands when Dan is happy and when he isn't. She sleeps in the basement, next to Dan. He makes her a nest, out of his very essence. A small bowl of solidified jelly that's always warm and always smells like home. Because it smells like Dan. A week later, Lulu takes human form for the first time. It scares everyone except Dan. A little girl, looks about 13 or 14. Golden hair, golden eyes. She talks non-stop, incoherently, in fragments. She steals candy from Emily's shelf. An hour later, she turns back into a little dragon and falls asleep in the nest. The human form lasts an hour a day, no more. Dan watches. He catalogs. Lulu is data he doesn't have. A living dragon. Not dead scales. Not a residual essence. A living, growing little dragon who calls her Mom through clicks and hisses. He doesn't devour her. Doesn't even think about it. She's family. It's a tag that doesn't require a catalog. Month 18. Yasmin Park appears in the workshop as a client, elegant, in black gloves, with the cold gaze of someone who knows the value of every item in the room, including the people. She is the owner of a trading caravan, a middleman, a broker between cities and workshops. She is 30 years old. She came to order a batch of medicinal reagents for resale. Dan refuses. He doesn't make goods for resale. Every item is personalized, for a specific person. Yasmin is surprised, then annoyed, then interested. She returns 3 days later, with a different proposal, not resale, a partnership. She supplies the workshop with rare materials from the south and west, scales, bones, herbs, minerals, everything that isn't found in the Lowell area. In return, Quietwater makes exclusive items for her caravan, protective amulets for horses, fabric for awnings that doesn't get wet or burn, medicine for the caravanners, everything personalized, everything for specific people on her team. Dan agrees. It's a good deal. Access to rare materials will expand the catalog. Yasmin enters the workshop's orbit, first as a partner, businesslike, with contracts and calculations. Then closer, she comes every month with the caravan, stays for 3 or 4 days, talks with Dan at night. She is the only one on the team who sees him not as a miracle or a mystery, but as a colleague, a business partner, a man in a body of slime. 3 months into their acquaintance, she tells him a story. At night, in the basement, when everyone is asleep. She speaks. She had a sister, a younger one. 3 years ago, Yasmin sold information, the location of a caravan traveling a dangerous route. She didn't sell it to gangsters, to a competitor. The competitor intercepted the route, took the contract. But the gangsters who were following the competitor attacked him, and Yasmin's sister worked in that competitor's caravan, where she'd gone after a fight with Yasmin. A coincidence, a chain of events Yasmin couldn't have foreseen. But the result is the same. Her sister died, Yasmin. Then she says, "I don't trust myself. Every decision I make could kill someone. I don't know how to live with that." Dan listens. Then he says, "I'm a repository. I store data. Forever. I never lose anything. If you want, tell me about her. Everything you remember, every detail. I'll save it." Yasmin tells him, for 2 hours, her sister's name, her voice, her habits, how she laughed, how she squinted in the sun, how she got angry when Yasmin was late, how her hair smelled. Dan writes it down. Every word, every image. A week later, he makes a pendant for Yasmin, a small capsule made of chitin and scales. Inside, a drop of his essence. Recorded in that drop are all the fragments of memory about her sister that Yasmin told him. If you press the pendant to your ear, you can hear it. Not a voice, not a recording, a reconstruction. Dan recreated the timbre and rhythm of her speech based on Yasmin's descriptions. It's not an exact copy, it's an approximation, but it's closer than nothing. Yasmin presses the pendant to her ear. She listens. Her face doesn't change. But her hand in the black glove grips the pendant so tightly that her knuckles turn white. She isn't crying. She doesn't know how. She stopped 3 years ago. But she wears the pendant. Every day, without taking it off. A month later, Yasmin moves the caravan's base to Lowell. She rents a house next to the workshop. Officially, she's a supplier and partner. Unofficially, she's the 6th member of the team. 5 women, 1 little dragon, and a slime that remembers everything. The 20th month. Minji finishes translating a key chapter of an ancient book. She goes down to the basement at night, wakes Dan up, says, "I found something." Reads. Dan listens. The book describes the origin of Velgaroth, Archon of the North, the Crimson One, the youngest of the 10. He is 1,000 years old, but dragons live for millions of years. 1,000 is a baby by their standards. And here's what's strange. The book describes his essence as incompatible, not dragon-like, different, coming from outside, from a point where reality is thin, from the point of seepage. Dan is silent. Then he says, "He's not a dragon." Minji nods. Then he speaks. He was human. Silence in the basement. Dan feels the cold pass through his body, a familiar cold, that very one, the first, from the puddle in the crevice. Velgaroth, Archon of the North. 1,000 years ago, he was human. He seeped through the point, like Dan. He became not slime, he became a dragon, and over 1,000 years he lost himself. Minji speaks again. The book describes Velgaroth's strange behavior. For the last 100 years, he has been devouring his own subjects. Methodically, everyone in a row. The book calls it madness, but Minji sees something else. He searches, he devours and reads. Every creature in his domain, he searches for something familiar, a structure he recognizes, an essence that smells like home. He is searching for another human. Dan sits in the basement, 30 kilograms of blue jelly, with a catalog of 700 entries, with a team upstairs, with a little dragon in a nest nearby, with the life he's built over 20 months. And he thinks, somewhere beyond the northern ridges sits a creature who, 1,000 years ago, was just like him. A human, an engineer, or a programmer, or someone in IT because his essence is incompatible. Because he came from a world where people think in terms of structures and systems. And after 1,000 years of solitude, this creature has gone mad, and now devours his world in search of the one who will understand. Dan is the only one who can stop it, and the only one who can understand it. He's afraid. Not of the dragon, not of death. He's afraid of becoming just like it, of forgetting who he is in 1,000 years, of forgetting the language in which he thinks, of forgetting the names of the people he loves, of forgetting that he is human. Lulu stirs in the nest, opens one golden eye, looks at Dan, snaps, buries her nose in his side, falls asleep. Dan looks at her. No, he won't forget. Not with them by his side. The 24th month, 2 years in Veldrain. Dan stands before the mirror in the workshop basement, in human form. 2 years ago, he was a puddle the size of an apple. Now he is 35 kilograms of a highly complex biological system capable of taking any form. And he chose this one. A man of average height, Asian features, short cropped hair, a polo shirt, khaki pants, 34 years old. Or 2, depending on how you count. The face isn't perfect, slightly blurred at the edges. The nose isn't quite right. The chin is a bit wider than it was in life. He pieced this face together from memory. And memory, even his memory, is not a photograph. But it's close enough that if someone from his old life saw him, they'd squint and say, "Dan, you've changed." He's lost weight. His vocal apparatus works perfectly. 2 years of training. He speaks the language of Veldrain without an accent. He can maintain human form for 3 hours. Then it falls apart. But 3 hours is 3 hours. He goes down to the basement and sheds the form. Saves a lot of energy. Today is an important day. The team is gathering in the workshop. Everyone. Haejin, Emily, Minji, Riley, Yasmin, Silas, Mira. Lulu, in human form, is sitting on a chair eating a bun she stole from Emily's shelf. Dan is on the table, in his base form. Blue jelly with 2 eyes. He speaks. It's time to head north. Silence. Everyone knows. They've been preparing for the last 4 months, ever since Minji translated the chapter on Velgaroth. Ever since it became clear that the Archon of the North won't stop, that he'll keep devouring his domain, that sooner or later he'll break through the ridges and reach Lowell. And Dan. Because Dan is the only one on the continent whose essence smells just like his, like home. Dan says, "I'm not going to kill him. I'm going to talk to him." Silas frowns. He says, "He's an Archon, SS rank. Conversations with Archons always end the same way." Dan replies, "You killed one. It didn't work. His daughter carried the consequences inside her for 3 years. It's worth a try." Silas is silent. Then he nods. Once. Emily says, "What if he doesn't want to listen?" Dan replies, "Then I have a plan B." He doesn't spell out plan B. Everyone understands. If the conversation fails, Dan will consume Velgaroth, scale by scale, shard by shard, just as he extracted the curse from Mira. Only the scale is different, not 14 days, years, maybe decades. A slow, methodical dissection of the Archon into its components, if it comes to that. Minji says, "I'm coming with you. I need to see. I need to know that my faith wasn't in vain, that compassion for monsters changes the world." Haejin says nothing. She takes her bow, straps on her quiver, stands by the door, ready. Riley says, "I'm staying. Someone has to mind the workshop. And Connor. His legs need tending every month." Dan nods. "Right." Yasmin speaks, "I'll secure the route. The caravan will take you to the pass. From there, on foot." Dan looks at Silas. Silas speaks, "I'm going. Not to negotiate. To make sure you come back alive if the negotiations fail." Mira speaks, "Me too." Silas starts to object. Mira looks at him. With that same gaze, gray eyes, round pupils, human. Which she got back thanks to Dan. Silas falls silent. Lulu finishes her bun, turns back into a little dragon, perches on Dan's shoulder. She clicks her tongue. "That means I'm with you," Dan says. "Thank you. To everyone." They leave in 3 days. Yasmin's caravan takes them to the pass, that very one, where she and Haejin cleared out a nest of ticks ages ago. Beyond the pass lie the ridges. The journey takes a week. Every day the air grows heavier, the pressure intensifies. The essence of Velgaroth permeates everything, the rocks, the air, the earth, the snow. Minji walks with her eyes closed. She guides them, tells them where to turn, where to go around, where to wait. Silas is in front, sword drawn. Every day they encounter creatures of the domain, beasts that serve Velgaroth, or served him before he began devouring them. Now they are fleeing south, away from their Archon. A stream of refugees, monster refugees. Minji looks at them. She is silent, but Dan sees her face. On the 8th day they reach the edge. The northern ridge ends in a cliff. Below lies a valley, vast, and everything in it is red, A crimson haze hangs over the land, thick, heavy, like smoke from a fire that will never go out. This is Velgaroth's domain. The earth is saturated with his essence. The air is saturated with his wrath, or his longing. Dan stands at the edge, in humanoid form, a polo shirt, khaki pants, Lulu on his shoulder, a little dragon. The team behind him. Haejin on the right, a bow in his hands. Silas on the left, sword at the ready. Minji behind him. His eyes are closed, his lips are moving. A prayer or a blessing. Peace beside his father. Quiet, serious. Emily stayed at the camp on the pass, with supplies and a first aid kit, in case they return needing help. Dan raises his hand, opens his palm. In it is a small drop, blue, transparent. It's his first essence. That very rainwater from the puddle in the crevice where he was born. He's kept it for 2 years, in the deepest layer of the cold storage, untouched, pure, the very first file in the system. He carefully drops the drop onto a rock. It lands on the snow and doesn't melt. It doesn't soak in. It lies there, small, blue, alive. Dan says, "A backup, in case I can't handle it over there. You'll put me back together. From the drafts." Haejin places her hand on his back, between his shoulder blades, where a person has a back, but he has solidified gel shaped like a back. She says nothing. No need. Her hand speaks. "I'm here." Emily isn't nearby, but Dan knows that somewhere on the pass she's sitting and wiping her glasses. All 6 lenses, one by one, like she does when she's nervous. Riley is in Lowell, in the smithy, striking the anvil with a hammer, because she doesn't know any other way to cope with the fact that the people she loves have gone to a place from which they may never return. Minji whispers in an ancient language, words that are 1,000 years old, words spoken before the pact, before the archons, before everything. The prayer of the first people of Veldraine, for those who walk into the darkness. Yasmin at the pass with the caravan. She has taken off the black glove from her left hand. For the first time in 3 years. Under the glove is a scar, an old one, in the shape of a letter Dan doesn't recognize. The first letter of his sister's name. Yasmin holds the pendant in her bare hand, listening to a voice that is no longer there. Lulu buries his nose in Dan's ear, hisses, clicks. He is small, hot, and absolutely certain that with Mom he is safe from harm. Dan stands on the edge, looks down, into the crimson haze. Somewhere down there sits a creature 1,000 years old, who was once human, who has forgotten how its native tongue sounds, which devours the world in search of someone who will say the word it remembers. Dan knows that word. Not just one, many. He remembers everything. It is his ability. It is his curse. It is his gift. He steps forward. His foot touches the crimson snow. The mirage parts, not out of fear, out of surprise. Something inside the domain senses him. It recognizes the scent. Not a dragon's, not a human's. Another. Earthly. An IT guy from Seattle who fell asleep at the wheel and woke up as a jelly apple in a strange world. Dan walks, step by step, down the slope, into the crimson darkness. Behind him is the team, the people he gathered, whom he fixed, for whom he made things. Not just things, things for them, tailored to their hands, their pain, their story. He is going to speak to a man he has never seen, in a language not heard here for 1,000 years. Somewhere deep in the crimson haze, something enormous turns its head. It listens. For the first time in 100 years, it listens instead of devouring. Because the wind carries a scent from the ridge, familiar, impossible. The scent of rainwater and silicon chips and coffee from a vending machine in the server room at 3 in the morning. The scent of home. Dan walks on. The haze closes in behind him, Lulu on his shoulder, Haejin behind him. The world lies ahead. He is an engineer. His job is to fix what is broken. Even if what is broken is a 1,000-year-old dragon who has forgotten that he is human. Even if the price might be everything he has. Because Dan Cho doesn't make things in general. He makes things for a specific person. And right now, that person is waiting for him. Waiting for 1,000 years. In the crimson darkness at the edge of the world. Alone. But no longer alone. Because Dan is coming.